My ungrateful children demanded everything: the mansion, the money, the company. My lawyer begged me to fight, but I just smiled and said, give them all. At the final hearing, I signed without hesitation. My kids were grinning, convinced they had won the jackpot. Then their lawyer read one line from the contract. The whole courtroom went silent, and their smiles vanished instantly as they realized I had not given them a fortune. I had given them a debt they could never escape. Before I tell you how I taught them the ultimate lesson, please like and subscribe. My name is Thaddeus Coleman, but in the shipping yards of Chicago, they just call me Thad. I am 71 years old. I started Coleman Logistics with one rusted truck and a back that did not know how to quit. 40 years later, I have a fleet of 500 vehicles and a net worth that people kill for. I thought I was building a legacy for my family. I thought I was working those 18-hour days so my children would not have to suffer like I did. But I made a mistake, a fatal mistake. I fed their stomachs, but I starved their characters. And last Tuesday, the bill for that mistake finally came due. It did not start with a conversation. It started with an invasion. I was in my office on the top floor of the Coleman Tower reviewing the quarterly fuel reports. The door slammed open. It was not my secretary. It was my son Julian and my daughter Nia. They did not knock. They did not say hello. They walked in like they owned the place, accompanied by a man in a cheap suit I had never seen before. Julian is 40 years old. He wears suits that cost $5,000, but he walks with the desperate energy of a man who owes money to bad people. Nia is 35. She is softer, but she is weak. She does whatever her husband Todd tells her to do. And right now, Todd was waiting in the hallway, probably calculating how much the office furniture would fetch at an auction. "Dad, we need to talk," Julian said. He didn't sit down. He stood over my desk, his hands planted on the mahogany surface I had bought when I made my first million. I put down my pen. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "I am busy, Julian," I said calmly. "If you need money for another investment, the answer is no." The last three failed. I am not funding a fourth. "This isn't about an investment," Nia piped up, her voice trembling slightly. She threw a thick blue folder onto my desk. It slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from my hand. "It is about the future of the company," Julian said. "You are 71, Dad. You are slipping. We saw the numbers from the last quarter. Profits are down 2%. You are making bad decisions. You are too old to run a logistics empire." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Profits were down because fuel prices were up globally. It was a market fluctuation, not a sign of dementia. But I knew they didn't care about the market. "So what is this?" I asked, pointing to the folder. "It is a transfer of leadership agreement," the lawyer in the cheap suit said, stepping forward. He looked nervous. He should be. I eat lawyers like him for breakfast. "It states that due to declining health and cognitive ability, you are voluntarily stepping down as CEO and transferring full controlling interest to your children, Julian and Nia Coleman. Effective immediately." I looked at Julian. His eyes were wide manic. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Then the door opened again. This time it was Brittany, Julian's wife. She is 30 years old, white, a former model who spends money faster than the Federal Reserve can print it. She walked in holding her phone up, the camera lens pointed directly at me. "If you refuse, Thad," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "we go live." I stared at the phone. "What are you talking about? I have spoken to some of your former secretaries," Brittany said, smiling a cruel smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We have stories, Thad, stories about sexual harassment, stories about you using racial slurs against your own employees, stories about you wandering around the office without your pants on because you are senile." Lies. All of it. I had treated every employee with respect for 40 years. I was a black man in an industry dominated by white men for decades. I had to be cleaner than clean just to survive. "They are lies," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "It doesn't matter if they are lies," Brittany replied, checking her nails. "In the court of public opinion, the accusation is the verdict. If we release these videos, your stock price tanks. The board will force you out anyway. Your legacy will be mud. You will be the crazy old pervert who destroyed his own company." I looked at them. My family. The people I had carried on my back. Julian, the son I had bailed out of jail 3 times. Nia, the daughter whose house I had paid for in cash. Brittany, the daughter-in-law, whose plastic surgeries I had unknowingly financed. They were not asking. They were mugging me. "You want the company?" I asked, looking at Julian. "I want what is mine," Julian snapped. "You built this on our backs, Dad. You were never home. You missed birthdays. You missed games. You owe us this." He was right about one thing. I had missed birthdays. I had missed games. I was working so they could have the luxury of standing here in designer clothes threatening me. I looked at the photo of Viola, my late wife, that sat on the corner of my desk. She had died 5 years ago. She was the only one who ever truly knew me. She had warned me. "Thad, you give them too much," she used to say. "You are making them soft." I took a deep breath. I felt the anger rising in my chest, hot and volcanic. I wanted to throw them out the window. I wanted to destroy them. But then a thought occurred to me. A memory. 5 years ago, right after Viola died, I had restructured the company. I had created a shadow corporation, a holding company called Atlas. It was a fail-safe, a poison pill designed for a hostile takeover. I had never intended to use it against my own children, but I had never imagined my children would become my enemies. I looked at Julian. I saw the desperation in his eyes. He needed this company not to run it, but to loot it. He was in deep. I looked at Brittany. She wanted the status. She wanted to be the queen of Atlanta society. I looked at Nia. She just wanted to stop her husband from yelling at her about money. They wanted the crown, but they didn't know the crown was made of lead. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. "Okay," I said. The room went silent. Brittany lowered her phone slightly. What Julian asked, suspicious. I said, "Okay," I repeated. "You are right. I am tired. I am old. Maybe it is time to rest." I reached for the intercom button on my desk. "Sterling, get in here," I said. Marcus Sterling, my personal lawyer and best friend, entered the room 30 seconds later. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at the intruders, then at me. "What is going on, Thad?" he asked. "Draw up the papers, Marcus," I said, leaning back in my chair. "The full transfer. I am giving them everything. The company, the assets, the controlling shares." Marcus looked at me. He saw the smile on my face. He saw the glint in my eye. He knew about Atlas. He knew about the poison pill. "Are you sure, Thaddeus?" he asked, emphasizing my full name. "Once you sign, there is no going back." "I am sure," I said, looking at Julian. "My children want to be kings. Let them be kings." Julian let out a breath he had been holding. He grinned a shark-like grin of victory. "You are making the right choice, Dad," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Finally." I looked at his hand on my shoulder, the hand that was stealing from me. "Get it done, Marcus," I said. "I want the signing ceremony tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., at the courthouse. I want witnesses." I stood up. I picked up the picture of Viola. "Now get out of my office," I said softly. "I have packing to do." They left. They walked out laughing, already spending the money in their heads. They thought they had won the war. They didn't realize they had just signed their own death warrants. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. "Enjoy it while it lasts, kids," I whispered, "because tomorrow you learn the difference between an asset and a liability." The champagne cork popped with a sound like a gunshot echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on the 45th floor. It was a sound of victory, or at least that is what it sounded like to everyone else in the room. To my son Julian, it sounded like a stay of execution. I was not there, of course. I was in my car driving home alone, but I knew exactly what was happening. I paid the rent on that penthouse, $15,000 a month for a view of the city Julian had never conquered. He was throwing a party to celebrate his hostile takeover of my life. Julian stood in the center of the room holding a glass of Cristal High. He was surrounded by sycophants, leeches, and fair-weather friends who smelled the fresh blood of new money. They toasted him. To the new king of Coleman Logistics, they shouted. Julian drank deep. He smiled that shark-like smile. But his hand was trembling, just a little, just enough to spill a drop of expensive wine onto his Italian silk cuff. He checked his phone for the 10th time in an hour. A message was waiting for him. No words, just a countdown. 5 days. That was the secret Julian was hiding behind the loud music and the expensive suits. He didn't want my company because he had a vision for the future. He didn't want to modernize the fleet or expand into new markets. He needed to gut it. He owed $5 million to a syndicate operating out of the back of a shipping container in the naval yards. Bad people. The kind of people who didn't file lawsuits when you missed a payment. They filed missing persons reports. Julian had gambled away his trust fund, his dignity, and his safety on underground poker games and bad real estate deals. He was desperate. He looked at my trucking empire and he didn't see a legacy. He saw a piggy bank he could smash open to save his own skin. Across the room, his brother-in-law Todd sat on a leather sofa casually flicking cigarette ash onto the floor. Todd was my daughter Nia's husband, a man who had failed at selling used cars, failed at selling insurance, and was now failing at being a decent human being. Todd was leaning over a tablet showing Nia a spreadsheet. "Look at this babe," Todd said, his voice thick with greed. "If we sell the refrigerated transport division, we get $20 million cash up front. We don't need those trucks. They are high maintenance. We liquidate the fleet, we take the cash, and we buy that villa in St. Bart's we talked about." Nia looked at the numbers. My daughter, the girl I used to take for ice cream on Sundays. She looked at the plan to dismantle her father's life work, and she didn't see betrayal. She saw a way to finally get her husband to stop yelling at her about money. "But Dad loves those trucks," she whispered, weak and hesitant. "Dad is retired," Todd snapped, snatching the drink from her hand. "Dad is history. We are the future, Nia. Do you want to be a queen, or do you want to be a daddy's girl forever?" Nia bit her lip. She looked at Julian, laughing too loud in the center of the room. She looked at the city lights below. "I want the villa," she said softly. "Sell it," Todd said, grinning. "Sell it all." While they were carving up the carcass of my empire before it was even dead, I pulled up to the iron gates of the Coleman estate. My home. It was a sprawling manor built of gray stone sitting on 5 acres of manicured gardens. I had built it for Viola. Every brick was laid with love. Every room held a memory of her voice, her laugh, the way she used to hum when she arranged flowers in the foyer. Since she died, the house had been too big, too quiet. But it was still mine. It was my sanctuary, or so I thought. As the gates swung open, I saw a car parked in the driveway, a red convertible. Todd's car. My stomach tightened. I had just signed away my company hours ago. I was tired. I wanted to pour a glass of bourbon, sit in my study, and look at Viola's picture. I didn't want to fight anymore today. But the vultures were not done feeding. I parked my old sedan next to the flashy sports car. I walked up the stone steps, my joints aching with the damp night air. Before I could even reach for my keys, the front door swung open. Nia stood there. She wasn't wearing her usual casual clothes. She was dressed up in a severe black dress wearing pearls I had given her mother. She looked like she was attending a funeral. Todd stood behind her, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk that made me want to introduce his teeth to the back of my hand. "Hi, Dad," Nia said. She didn't move to let me in. She blocked the entrance. "Nia," I said, my voice weary. "What are you doing here? It is late. We need to talk," Todd said, stepping forward, pushing past his wife to take charge. "We have been discussing the transition." "The transition," I repeated. "I already signed the papers, Todd. The company is yours. What else do you want?" "We are talking about the image," Todd said. "The brand. You see, Julian and I, we are going to be the new faces of Coleman Logistics. Young, dynamic, powerful. We are going to be hosting galas, entertaining foreign investors. We need a venue that reflects that status." I looked at him. I looked at the house behind him. "And your apartment is not enough?" I asked. "The penthouse is a bachelor pad," Todd scoffed. "And our place in the suburbs. It is fine for a family, but it is not executive. It is not presidential." He gestured around at the stone columns of my porch. "This place, though, this screams power. This is a CEO's residence." I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was the icy clarity of realization. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my life. They wanted to wear my skin. "You want the house?" I asked. "We think it is best," Nia said, rushing to fill the silence, her voice high and nervous. "Dad, this place is huge. It is too much for one person. The maintenance, the cleaning the stairs. It is dangerous for someone your age. You could fall. You could get hurt and no one would know for days." She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand felt cold. "We found a solution, Dad. A perfect solution. The guest house." The guest house. I looked over my shoulder toward the back of the property. There was a small cottage there. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. It was where the groundskeeper used to live before I hired a service. It was clean, but it was small. It was a servant's quarters. It is cozy, Nia insisted. It is single level. No stairs. You would be right here on the property so we can keep an eye on you. But Todd and I, and Julian, we need the main house. To work. To build the future. Todd smirked. Plus, Dad, let's be honest. You are retired. You are putting out to pasture. You don't need a mansion to watch TV and sleep. You should be grateful we are letting you stay on the estate at all. Most kids would ship you off to a nursing home. There it was. The naked arrogance. The cruelty disguised as practicality. I looked at my daughter. I looked for a sign of resistance, a sign that she remembered who built this roof over her head. But she just looked down, unable to meet my eyes. She wanted the status. She wanted the big house to show off to her friends. She was willing to banish her father to the shed to get it. I took a deep breath. The night air smelled of rain and jasmine. Viola's favorite scent. I could fight them. I could tell them to get off my property. The deed to the house wasn't in the transfer agreement I had signed today, not explicitly, but then I remembered the plan. The Scorpion plan. I had to give them everything. They had to believe they had won completely. They needed to feel invincible so that when the floor dropped out from under them, the fall would be fatal. If I fought for the house, they would be on guard. They would scrutinize the contracts. They might find the trap before they stepped into it. No, I had to let them take it. I had to let them gorge themselves until they choked. Okay, I said softly. Todd blinked, surprised. He had expected a fight. He had his arguments ready, his insults sharpened. Okay, he asked, suspicious. Just like that. Just like that, I said. You are right. It is a big house. I am an old man. I don't need the space. I walked past them into the foyer. The house smelled of lemon polish and old wood. My home. I am going to pack a bag, I said, walking toward the grand staircase. Just my clothes and a few personal items. You can have the rest. The furniture, the art, the rugs. Enjoy it. Nia let out a breath she had been holding. Oh, Dad, thank you. You won't regret this. We are going to take such good care of it. I didn't answer. I walked up the stairs, my hand sliding along the banister for the last time. In the master bedroom, I opened my old leather suitcase. I didn't pack much. My shirts, my comfortable shoes, my razor. I went to the nightstand. I picked up the silver-framed photograph of Viola. It was taken on our 25th anniversary. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes full of light. Forgive me, Viola, I whispered to the photo. I am leaving our home, but I promise you I will burn it down before I let them keep it. I put the photo in the suitcase. I looked around the room one last time. The bed we had shared, the window where we watched the sunrise. I closed the suitcase. It clicked shut with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. I walked back downstairs. Nia and Todd were already in the living room. Todd was pouring himself a drink from my crystal decanter. Nia was running her hands over the velvet curtains, planning her redecoration. They looked up as I descended. Here, I said, holding out the heavy brass key ring. The keys to the kingdom. Todd snatched them from my hand. He didn't say thank you. He just jingled them possessively, a wide grin splitting his face. You made the right choice, old man, he said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to stagger me. Go get settled in the shack. Don't worry about the noise tonight. Julian is coming over. We are going to have a real party. A housewarming. I gripped the handle of my suitcase. I walked to the door. I opened it and the night wind hit my face. I turned back to look at them one last time, my daughter and her husband standing in the center of my life, consuming it like locusts. Nia, I said. She looked at me holding a vase I had bought in Paris. Yes, Dad. This house is very big, I said, my voice low and even. It has many rooms, many shadows. I paused, looking deep into her eyes. Watch you don't get lost, I said. Nia frowned, a flicker of unease crossing her face. What do you mean? I didn't explain. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the heavy oak door behind me. I walked down the steps, past my car, past the gardens, toward the small guest house in the dark. Behind me, the lights of the mansion blazed on. I heard music start to thump, the bass vibrating through the ground. They were celebrating. They thought they had stripped me bare. They thought they had taken my crown, my castle, and my power. They didn't know that a king is a king even in a cottage, and they didn't know that the castle they had just stolen was built on a landmine. I unlocked the door to the guest house. It was cold inside and smelled of dust. I set my suitcase down on the small bed. I sat down and took out my phone. I dialed Sterling. "It is done," I said. "They have the house." "Good," Sterling replied, his voice crisp. "Phase 2 is complete." "Are you okay, Thad?" I looked out the small window at the mansion glowing like a cruise ship in the night. "I am fine," I said. "Let them have their party, Sterling. Let them drink my wine and sleep in my bed, because tomorrow," I whispered to the empty room, "tomorrow the bill comes due, and it is going to be expensive." The next day, I woke up in the guest house. The mattress was thin and the walls were paper thin, but I slept better than I had in years. I woke up with a purpose. It was Thursday. The signing was scheduled for tomorrow morning. But today, I had one last test for my children. One last chance for them to show a shred of humanity before I pulled the trigger. I drove my old Ford sedan to the Rolling Hills Country Club. I had been a member for 30 years. I had paid for the renovation of the clubhouse. I had sponsored the charity tournaments. It was where I went to eat a quiet lunch and read the paper. But today it wasn't quiet. As I walked into the dining room, I heard them before I saw them. Loud laughter, the clinking of glasses, the kind of noise that says we own this place. Julian and Brittany were holding court at the best table by the window, the one overlooking the 18th green. They were surrounded by a dozen people, hangers-on, social climbers, people who wouldn't have given Julian the time of day a week ago but were now drawn to the scent of fresh money, like flies to rotting meat. The table was covered in seafood towers, steaks, and bottles of wine that cost more than my first truck. Julian was leaning back in his chair, smoking a cigar inside the dining room, which was strictly forbidden. But the manager, Mr. Henderson, was standing nearby, looking nervous and saying nothing. He knew Julian was about to become the CEO. He was afraid. I walked toward my usual corner table. I was wearing my work clothes, khaki pants, a polo shirt, and my old leather jacket. I looked like a truck driver, which is exactly what I am at heart. Julian spotted me. His eyes lit up not with recognition, but with malice. He tapped his glass with a fork, silencing the table. "Well, well, well," he announced, his voice booming across the room. "Look who it is, everyone. The former king has arrived." He stood up and made a mock bow, sweeping his arm out. The table erupted in laughter. Brittany covered her mouth, giggling like a schoolgirl. I stopped walking. I looked at him. "Hello, Julian," I said, calm, steady. Julian walked over to me, his expensive Italian shoes clicking on the parquet floor. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. He put an arm around my shoulder, heavy and condescending. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he asked loudly, performing for his audience. "This is a members-only club. You know, for the elite. Maybe you should try the diner down the road. They have a senior discount on burgers. It is more your speed now." The table laughed again. Louder this time. Crueler. "I am still a member, Julian," I said, shrugging his arm off. "I pay my dues." Julian scoffed. "For now. But tomorrow when I take over the company accounts, well, we are going to have to review some of these unnecessary expenses. A country club membership for a retired man living in a shack. It seems wasteful, doesn't it?" He turned to Brittany. "Babe, tell him. Tell him about the new image we are building." Brittany stood up. She was wearing a white dress that looked like it cost $5,000. She walked over holding a glass of ice water. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. "Thad," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You look tired, old. You really don't fit in here anymore. Look at these people. Young, vibrant, successful. You are just depressing the atmosphere." She took a sip of her water. Then she stumbled. It was fake, a bad acting job. She lurched forward and the entire contents of the glass splashed onto my chest. Ice water soaked my shirt, running down my stomach, chilling me to the bone. "Oops," she squealed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Thad. I am so sorry." I tripped. She wasn't sorry. Her eyes were dancing with glee. Julian roared with laughter. He slapped his knee. "Careful, Dad," he shouted. "You are all wet. You look like you wet yourself. Maybe we need to get you some diapers along with that burger." The whole table was howling now. Even the waiters were looking down, hiding their discomfort. I stood there dripping wet, cold, humiliated in the place where I had spent 30 years building respect. I looked at Brittany. She was smirking, waiting for me to explode, waiting for the angry black man to make a scene so she could play the victim. I looked at Julian, my son, laughing at his father's shame. I didn't explode. I didn't shout. I took a napkin from the nearest table. I slowly, deliberately wiped the water from my face. I dried my hands. I looked Julian in the eye. "That was an expensive glass of water, son," I said, my voice low just for him. He laughed again. "It is free, old man. Water is free." "Nothing is free, Julian," I said. "Everything has a cost, and you just put it on the company tab." I pointed to the table laden with food and wine. "Enjoy your lunch," I said. "Eat up, drink up, order the lobster, order the vintage champagne." I leaned in closer. "Because this lunch, it is going to be the most expensive meal you ever ate." Julian frowned, confused by my tone. "What are you talking about?" "You will see," I said. I turned and walked away. I walked out of the dining room, my head high, my wet shirt sticking to my skin. I heard Julian behind me shouting something about me being senile, but I didn't look back. I walked out to the parking lot. The sun was shining, but I felt cold. Not from the water, but from the finality of it. That was it, the last chance. If Julian had offered me a napkin, if he had told Brittany to apologize, if he had shown 1 ounce of respect, I might have hesitated. I might have reconsidered the nuclear option, but he didn't. He laughed. I got into my car. Marcus Sterling was waiting in the passenger seat. He had seen everything through the window. His face was grim. "You okay, Thad?" he asked, handing me a towel he had grabbed from the gym. I dried my face. I looked at the clubhouse at the window where my son was celebrating my humiliation. "I am fine, Marcus," I said. "I am clear." Marcus opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue leather. "The transfer agreement," he said. "It is ready." He flipped to the back, to the appendix. "Is the scorpion clause in there?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "Page 412, clause 88B. It is buried deep, Thad. Even a good lawyer would miss it if they weren't looking for it. And Julian's lawyer? That kid in the cheap suit? He won't look. He is too busy counting his commission." I touched the paper. It felt heavy, lethal. "And Atlas Holdings?" I asked. "Set up and waiting," Marcus said. "The moment you sign, the moment you resign as CEO, the debt transfers. It is a domino effect, Thad. Once it starts, it doesn't stop until everything is flattened." He looked at me, his eyes full of concern. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "They are your children, Thad. This will destroy them. It will leave them with nothing." I looked back at the clubhouse. I remembered the water hitting my chest. I remembered the laughter. "They already have nothing." "Marcus," I said, "they have no character, they have no honor, they have no love. All they have is greed." I started the car. "I am not destroying them," I said, putting the car in gear. "I am teaching them. I am giving them the one thing I never gave them before." "What is that?" Marcus asked. "Consequences," I said. I drove away from the club, leaving the laughter behind. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow was Judgment Day. And the judge was me. To understand why I am about to destroy my own children, you have to go back 5 years. It was the day of Viola's funeral. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the black soil of the cemetery into mud. I stood by the open grave, my heart buried inside that mahogany casket, along with the only woman who had ever loved me for me. I was broken. I was a man standing in the ruins of his life, holding an umbrella that did nothing to stop the cold from seeping into his bones. But my children were not cold. They were impatient. I watched them through the veil of rain. Julian was checking his watch every 30 seconds, tapping his foot on the wet grass. He wasn't mourning his mother. He was calculating how long he had to pretend to be sad before he could get back to his poker game. Nia was whispering to Todd, complaining that her heels were sinking into the dirt and that the service was taking too long. Brittany was taking a selfie, carefully angling the camera so the hearse was in the background, but her makeup looked tragic enough for social media. They were vultures, waiting for the carcass to cool. That was the moment the blindfold fell from my eyes. Viola had been the glue holding us together, the soft heart that made excuses for their greed. Without her, I saw them clearly. They didn't see a father standing there in the rain. They saw a bank vault with a pulse. That afternoon, while the family gathered at the house to drink my wine and eat the funeral food, I slipped away. I drove to Marcus Sterling's office. I walked in dripping wet mud on his expensive carpet. "Fix it, Marcus," I said. "Fix what, Thad?" he asked, pouring me a drink. "The company," I said. "The legacy. If I die tomorrow, they will tear it apart like wild dogs. I need a fail-safe. I need a poison pill." That was the birth of the Scorpion Plan. We spent months restructuring. We created a shell, a holding company called Atlas Holdings. It sounded strong, it sounded powerful, it sounded like exactly the kind of corporate entity a young, arrogant CEO would want to control. We moved everything into Atlas, every truck, every warehouse, every contract, but we also moved the debt. Coleman Logistics looked profitable on paper, and it was, but expansion costs money. I had taken out a massive commercial loan to upgrade the fleet to green energy trucks. $85 million. It was a calculated risk, a good debt that the company revenue could easily service as long as I was at the helm, as long as the banks trusted the captain. But Marcus and I added a clause to the loan agreement, a tiny, terrifying clause buried in 500 pages of legal jargon, the accelerated payment clause. It stated that the loan was secured by the personal guarantee of the founding CEO Thaddeus Coleman. If Thaddeus Coleman was removed from power, if he resigned, if control was transferred to any other party without the express written consent of the bank, the loan would be considered in default. The full amount, $85 million, due immediately. It was a bomb wired to my heartbeat. As long as I sat in the chair, the company was safe. The moment I stood up, the timer started. Now, 5 years later, sitting in my car outside the country club, with the memory of that ice water soaking my shirt, I knew it was time to detonate it. Marcus handed me the document. It was heavy. 500 pages of dense legal text bound in a blue folder. It looked like a trophy. It was actually a death sentence. I ran my hand over the cover. "Atlas Holdings," I whispered. "The weight of the world." Marcus turned to the critical page. Clause 88B. "Here it is," he said, pointing to the paragraph. "The transfer of assets includes the transfer of all liabilities associated with Atlas Holdings. The new controlling partners assume full unlimited personal liability for all outstanding debts." I read the words. They were dry, boring, legal, but they were lethal. Unlimited personal liability. That meant they couldn't just bankrupt the company and walk away. The bank would come for everything, their penthouses, their sports cars, their jewelry, their future. "They never read the contracts," Marcus said, closing the folder. "Julian thinks reading is for employees. He just signs where the sticky note tells him to." Marcus looked out the window, his face troubled. "This is nuclear, Thad. Once you sign this, once you hand it over tomorrow, the bank gets notified automatically. The freeze happens within the hour. By lunchtime on Friday, they will be insolvent. By dinner time, they will be homeless." I thought about the lunch I had just left. I thought about Julian laughing as I wiped water from my face. I thought about the way he called me old man. "Good," I said. "Let them starve. Maybe hunger will teach them what abundance never could." My phone rang. The screen lit up with Julian's face. I stared at it for a moment, letting it ring. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice, pushing down the father who wanted to save his son, and bringing forward the businessman who had to fire an incompetent employee. I answered. "Hello, Julian. Where are you, old man?" Julian's voice barked through the speaker, loud and distorted. "We have been waiting. My lawyer says he sent the final draft to Sterling an hour ago. Why haven't you responded? We need to get this done." "I am with Sterling now," I said calmly. "We are reviewing the paperwork. It is a big document, Julian, 500 pages. We have to be thorough." "Thorough," Julian scoffed. "It is boilerplate, Dad. Just standard transfer stuff. Stop stalling. I know what you are doing. You are trying to drag this out, hoping I will change my mind. Hoping I will let you keep your little throne." "No, son," I said. "I am not hoping for that." "Then sign it," Julian shouted. "Sign it and send it over. I have a board meeting scheduled for Monday morning. First item on the agenda is cleaning house." "Cleaning house?" I asked, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. "Yeah," Julian said, his voice dripping with glee. "Those dinosaurs you have on the board, Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Gable, all your old cronies, they are gone. I am firing them all. We are bringing in new blood, my friends, people who know how to make real money." Not this slow, steady garbage you have been doing for 40 years. He was going to fire them. He was going to fire the people who had stood by me when the business was nothing but a garage and a prayer. Mr. Henderson, who had lent me money for my first truck when the bank said no because of the color of my skin. Mrs. Gable, who had run the office for 30 years. He wasn't just killing my company, he was killing my family. That was the final nail. If I had any hesitation, any lingering doubt, it evaporated in that second. Julian was a cancer, and you don't negotiate with cancer, you cut it out. You are right, Julian, I said, my voice dropping to a low, smooth timbre. I am being an old man, overly cautious. I shouldn't stand in the way of progress. Exactly, Julian said, his tone shifting from angry to smug. Finally, you get it, so you will sign. I will do better than that, I said. I want to do this properly. I want a ceremony. A ceremony, Julian asked, suspicious. Yes. I want to hand it over officially, in front of a judge, in front of the press. If I'm going to retire, I want to do it with dignity. I want the world to see me give you the keys. Julian was silent for a second, calculating. He loved attention. He loved the camera. He imagined the headlines. Son takes over empire, the new king. Fine, he said. But soon. Tomorrow morning, I said. 9 a.m., the downtown courthouse. Bring your lawyer. Bring Nia. Bring Todd. Bring Brittany. Bring everyone. I want witnesses. Done, Julian said. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late, old man, and bring the pen, the gold one. I want to use it to sign my new salary check. He hung up. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I looked at Marcus. He wants to fire Henderson, I said. Marcus winced. Henderson is the godfather of your daughter, Thad. I know, I said. I picked up the blue folder. It felt lighter now. It didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a weapon. 9 a.m. tomorrow, Marcus, I said. Book the courtroom. Call the judge. And call the bank. Tell them to have the default notice ready to serve at 9:30. Marcus nodded slowly, closing his briefcase. It is going to be a bloodbath, Thad. No, Marcus. I corrected him, staring out the windshield at the manicured lawns of the country club that didn't want me. It is going to be a coronation. I am going to give him exactly what he asked for. The crown, the title, the responsibility. I started the engine. And then I am going to watch the weight of it crush him. Friday morning was a symphony of chaos and ambition. The courthouse was packed not just with the usual crowd of bored clerks and desperate criminals, but with the shining, glittering elite of Atlanta's new money scene. Julian had been busy. He had leaked the news of the transfer to every business journal and gossip blog in the city. The press was there, cameras flashing microphones, hungry for a soundbite from the young, dynamic heir who was about to take the throne. I stood in the corner of the courtroom watching the spectacle. I was wearing my best suit, a charcoal gray wool that I had bought for Viola's funeral. It felt appropriate. Today was another kind of burial. Julian was in the center of the room, preening like a peacock. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house. His hair was slicked back, his teeth were bleached white, and his smile was so wide it looked painful. Brittany was clinging to his arm, draped in diamonds, posing for selfies with anyone who would look at her. Nia and Todd were there too, looking smug and satisfied like cats who had just swallowed the canary. They didn't look at me. To them, I was already a ghost, a relic of the past to be discarded as soon as the ink was dry. The judge entered a stern woman named Abernathy who had presided over business disputes for 20 years. She banged her gavel, silencing the chatter. This is a special session for the notarization and filing of a transfer of ownership agreement for Coleman Logistics, she announced. Are all parties present? Yes, Your Honor, Julian boomed, stepping forward. Yes, Your Honor, I said quietly from my corner. I walked to the plaintiff's table. Marcus Sterling was already there, the blue folder sitting in front of him like a loaded weapon. Julian and his lawyer took the defense table, although today they thought they were the victors. Julian's lawyer was a kid named Pierce. He looked about 25, fresh out of law school, with a tie that was too wide and a confidence that was unearned. He didn't even open the folder Marcus had sent over. He just tapped it with his pen, looking bored. Your Honor, Pierce said, my client has reviewed the documents. We are ready to proceed. It is a standard transfer. Nothing complicated. Marcus looked at me. He raised an eyebrow. He didn't read it, his eyes said. He didn't even look at the appendix. I suppressed a smile. Arrogance was a powerful drug. It made you blind. The judge looked at me. Mr. Coleman, do you understand that by signing this document, you are relinquishing all rights, titles, and interests in Coleman Logistics and its subsidiaries? I do, Your Honor, I said. Do you understand that this action is irrevocable? I do. And do you do this of your own free will without coercion? I looked at Julian. I looked at the way he was tapping his foot, impatient for me to finish. I looked at Brittany checking her makeup in her phone screen. I looked at Nia whispering to Todd about redecorating the executive suite. I thought about the ice water. I thought about the guest house. I thought about the years of theft and disrespect. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I do this freely. Then let us proceed, the judge said. Marcus opened the folder. He slid the document across the table. It was thick, heavy, a tome of legal consequences. He opened it to the signature page. Sign here, Thad, he whispered. I picked up the pen. It was a gold Mont Blanc, a gift from the employees on my 60th birthday. It was heavy in my hand. The room went silent. The cameras zoomed in. The reporters held their breath. This was the moment. The end of an era. The fall of a king. I looked at the signature line. Thaddeus Washington Coleman. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt a strange calm, a clarity that comes only when you know you are doing the right thing, no matter how painful. I put the nib to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. I signed my name with a flourish, the loops and curves I had practiced since I was a boy dreaming of owning a company. Thaddeus W. Coleman. It was done. Julian didn't wait for the ink to dry. He snatched the paper from the table, almost ripping it. He held it up over his head like a championship belt, his face twisted in a rictus of triumph. It is done, he shouted to the cameras. Coleman Logistics is mine. The future starts now. The room erupted. Flashbulbs popped, blinding me. Brittany squealed and threw her arms around Julian's neck. Todd high-fived Nia. Even Pierce the lawyer allowed himself a smug little smile. They were celebrating. They were popping invisible champagne corks. They were already spending the profits. I stood up slowly. My knees popped. I felt old, but I also felt dangerous. I watched them for a moment, letting them have their victory lap, letting them taste the sweetness of the fruit before they realized it was poisoned. Julian turned to me, his face flushed with success. Thanks, old man, he said condescendingly. Don't worry, we will take good care of it. You can go feed the pigeons now. The courtroom laughed. A few reporters chuckled. I didn't laugh. I turned to Marcus. Now I said. Marcus stood up. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a judge passing a death sentence. Excuse me, Your Honor. Marcus's voice cut through the celebration like a knife. Before we conclude, there is one final procedural matter. The room quieted down. Julian frowned, annoyed. What now, Sterling? He snapped. The papers are signed. It is over. Not quite, Marcus said. According to the terms of the agreement, specifically the disclosure protocol required for a transfer of this magnitude, the new owners must be formally notified of all active liabilities associated with the acquisition. Liabilities. Pierce scoffed. Coleman Logistics is profitable. We checked the books. There are no liabilities. You checked the operating books, Marcus corrected him. You didn't check the holding company structure. He picked up the blue folder. He didn't open it. He just held it. Mr. Coleman, Marcus said, addressing Julian. As the new CEO and majority shareholder of Atlas Holdings, the parent company of Coleman Logistics, you are required to acknowledge the activation of the accelerated payment clause. Julian blinked. Accelerated what? Marcus turned to the judge. Your Honor, may I read the relevant clause for the record? Proceed, the judge said, looking interested. Marcus opened the folder to page 412. The room was deadly silent now. The cameras were still rolling, but the mood had shifted. The smell of victory was being replaced by the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. Clause 88B, Marcus read, his voice steady and loud. Upon the transfer of controlling interest, resignation, or removal of the founding CEO Thaddeus Coleman, any and all commercial loans secured by the personal guarantee of said founder shall be considered in default, and the full principal balance shall become due and payable immediately. He paused. He looked up at Julian. Furthermore, the new controlling partners assume full, unlimited personal liability for said debt. Julian laughed. It was a nervous sound. So what, he said. What debt? A few truck payments. We can handle that. Marcus shook his head. Not truck payments, Mr. Coleman. The expansion loan. The loan used to modernize the fleet and acquire the new distribution centers in Asia. He looked at the paper again. The outstanding balance is $85 million. The number hung in the air. $85 million. Julian's smile didn't just fade, it vanished. It was erased from his face as if it had never existed. His skin turned the color of wet ash. 85 million, he whispered. Due immediately, Marcus confirmed. As of the moment your father signed that paper. But the company has assets, Pierce stammered, realizing too late that he had walked his client into a minefield. We can liquidate. You can. Marcus agreed. But the assets are tied up in operations. Liquidating them would take months. The bank requires payment today. And since the loan is now in default, they have the right to seize collateral. Collateral? Julian asked, his voice trembling. Marcus closed the folder. Since you assumed unlimited personal liability, Marcus said the collateral is everything you own. Your penthouse, your cars, your personal bank accounts, your wife's jewelry. He looked at Nia and Todd. And your house too, Mrs. Coleman. And yours, Mr. Smith. The bank has already been notified. In fact, Marcus checked his watch. I believe the freeze on your personal assets should be taking effect right about now. As if on cue, Julian's phone buzzed. Then Brittany's. Then Nia's. They pulled them out. They stared at the screens. Notifications from their banks. Account frozen. Credit limit revoked. Asset seizure pending. No. Julian screamed. No, this is a trick. This is illegal. You cannot do this. I did not do it, I said, speaking for the first time since I signed. You did it, Julian. You wanted the company. You wanted the crown. I walked over to him. I looked into his terrified eyes. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Son, I whispered. Julian looked at me. He looked at the paper in his hand, the paper he had waved like a trophy just moments ago. He realized it wasn't a deed. It was an anchor. And he was drowning. You set me up, he hissed. I gave you what you asked for, I replied. I gave you everything. I turned to the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. I believe my business here is done. I walked toward the door. Behind me, chaos erupted. Brittany was screaming at Julian. Todd was shouting at his lawyer. The reporters were shouting questions, sensing the story of the year. But I didn't stop. I walked out of the courtroom, out of the noise, out of the life I had built for them. I walked into the quiet hallway where the only sound was the tapping of my own shoes. I was retired. I was broke on paper. I was homeless. But for the first time in 40 years, I was free. The courtroom was vibrating with the energy of a coronation. The flashbulbs were still popping, creating a strobe effect that made Julian's triumphant grin look jagged and grotesque. He was shaking hands with his lawyer, Pierce, who looked like he had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. Brittany was already typing on her phone, probably posting a picture of the signed contract with a caption about new beginnings and boss moves. Nia and Todd were huddled together, whispering excitedly about which wing of my estate they would occupy first. They were drunk on victory. They were high on the fumes of my legacy. I stood there, my hands resting on the edge of the plaintiff's table, and I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing you cut the brake lines yourself. I looked at Marcus Sterling. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands folded over the blue folder. He wasn't looking at the celebration. He was looking at the judge, waiting for the room to settle. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. Now, Marcus, I whispered. Marcus stood up. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He didn't shout. He simply cleared his throat. Excuse me, Your Honor, Marcus said, his deep baritone cutting through the chatter like a foghorn. Before we adjourn, there is one final procedural matter regarding the immediate execution of the contract. The room quieted down, but the smiles didn't fade. Julian turned around, looking annoyed like a king interrupted by a servant. What is it now, Sterling? Julian snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. The papers are signed. The company is mine. If you are looking for a severance package, you will have to wait for the HR meeting on Monday. The reporters chuckled. Pierce smirked, adjusting his tie. It is not about severance, Mr. Coleman, Marcus replied, his face an unreadable mask of professional calm. It is about liability, specifically the activation of the transfer clauses embedded in Appendix C of the agreement you just signed. Pierce laughed, a dismissive, arrogant sound. Appendix C. Your Honor is just standard boilerplate, Pierce said, waving his hand. Indemnification clauses, minor clerical details. We can handle that next week. Marcus turned his gaze to Pierce. It was a look of profound pity. "I am afraid we cannot wait until next week," Marcus said. "The clause in question is self-executing. It triggers the moment the signature is applied." He picked up the blue folder. He opened it slowly, deliberately. The rustle of the paper was the only sound in the room. "Your Honor." "If I may," Marcus said, addressing Judge Abernathy, "I would like to read Clause 88B of Appendix C into the record to ensure all parties understand their immediate obligations." The judge looked intrigued. She leaned forward. "Proceed, Mr. Sterling." Marcus adjusted his glasses. He looked at the page, then he looked directly at Julian. Clause 88B, the Accelerated Payment Protocol. Marcus read his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "Upon the voluntary transfer of majority control resignation or removal of the founding CEO Thaddeus Coleman, any and all commercial loans secured by the personal guarantee of said founder shall be considered in default, and the full principal balance shall become due and payable immediately." Julian frowned. He didn't understand. He looked at Pierce. Pierce looked confused. So what Julian said, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "So we refinance. Dad probably owes a few payments on the trucks. Big deal." Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. He wasn't finished. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice rising slightly, adding weight to every syllable. "The new controlling partners identified herein as Julian Coleman and Nia Coleman, acting as primary shareholders of Atlas Holdings, hereby assume full unlimited personal liability for said debt." He lowered the paper. He took off his glasses. "This includes the forfeiture of all personal assets to satisfy the debt should the company liquidity prove insufficient." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. The air conditioner hummed. A reporter shifted in his seat. Brittany stopped typing. Her thumb hovered over her screen. Julian's smile faltered. It flickered like a dying light bulb. "What debt?" he asked, his voice tight. "Coleman Logistics is profitable. We saw the balance sheets. There is no major debt." "You saw the operating sheets," Marcus corrected him gently. "You did not review the capital expansion ledger for the holding company. You did not look at the financing for the new Asian distribution network." "Asian distribution." Julian repeated the words, sounding foreign in his mouth. "Yes," Marcus said. "Your father took out a commercial mortgage to finance the expansion into the Pacific market. It was a massive undertaking. High risk, high reward." Julian looked at me. His eyes were wide, searching for a lifeline, searching for a punchline to this terrible joke. "How much?" he whispered. Marcus looked at the document again. "The current outstanding principal, including early termination fees and immediate interest acceleration, is $85 million. $85 million. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. $85 million. The reaction was visceral. It started with Brittany. Her hand, which had been clutching her quilted Chanel bag, a bag that cost more than my first car, suddenly went limp. The bag slipped from her fingers. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, the gold chain clattering against the wood. Clack. That sound was the period at the end of their lives. Julian's face went gray. All the color drained out of him, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat. He gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles turning white. 85, he stammered. Million, Marcus finished for him. And since the clause is immediate, Marcus added, checking his watch, the bank has already been notified of the transfer. The default is active. The demand for payment has been issued. No, Julian shouted. His voice cracked, breaking into a high-pitched squeal of panic. No, that is impossible. You are lying. Dad, tell him he is lying. We don't have $85 million. I stepped forward. I walked out from behind the table. I moved slowly, my steps echoing in the silent courtroom. I stopped a few feet from my son. I looked into his terrified eyes. I am not lying, Julian, I said, my voice calm, steady. I tried to tell you, running a company is not just about profits and parties. It is about risk. It is about leverage. But Dad, Julian pleaded, tears welling up in his eyes. 85 million. That is everything. That is more than the company has in cash. I know, I said. That is why I was the guarantor. The bank trusted me. They knew I could steer the ship. They knew I would make the payments. But they don't trust you, Julian. They don't know you. And the moment I signed that paper, the moment I stepped down, they called the loan. They want their money, I said, leaning in close. And they want it now. Pierce, the young lawyer, jumped up. He was sweating, his cheap suit staining at the armpits. Your Honor, this is entrapment, he yelled, his voice shaking. My client was not made aware of this liability. This contract is void. Marcus turned on him like a wolf on a rabbit. Entrapment, Marcus scoffed. Mr. Pierce, you were provided with the full documentation 72 hours ago. The folder was on your desk. Did you read Appendix C? Did you advise your client on the liabilities of Atlas Holdings? Or did you just look at the commission check and tell him to sign? Pierce opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He hadn't read it. We all knew it. He had committed malpractice in front of a room full of reporters. His career was over before it began. Nia let out a low moan. She grabbed Todd's arm. Todd, she whispered, her voice rising in hysteria. Unlimited personal liability. What does that mean, Todd? Todd looked sick. He looked like he was about to vomit on his shoes. It means they can take everything, he whispered. Our house, the cars, the savings. Brittany screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of realization. My trust fund, she yelled at Julian. You said my money was safe. You said we would be rich. They cannot touch my trust fund, Julian. Tell them. Marcus looked at her. Actually, Mrs. Coleman, Marcus said coldly, since you co-signed the spousal guarantee on the director's indemnification form, another document you signed without reading this morning, your assets are also fair game. The bank will likely move to freeze all associated accounts within the hour to prevent capital flight. Julian looked at me. The hatred in his eyes was gone, replaced by a pure animalistic fear. Dad, you have to stop this, he begged. You have the money. You can pay it off. You can guarantee it again. Please. We will be ruined. We will be on the street. I looked at him. I looked at the son who had laughed when water was thrown in my face. I looked at the son who had called me old man and tried to throw me out of my own home. I smiled. It was the smile of a man who had finally put down a heavy load. I cannot help you, Julian, I said. I am retired. Remember, you wanted me out. You wanted the control. I pointed to the paper on the table, the paper with my signature still wet in black ink. You have the control now, son. You are the CEO. You are the king. I checked my own watch, and if my math is correct, the bank's algorithm just processed the default. As if on cue, a sound rippled through the courtroom. Not a voice, a vibration, buzz, 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 phones. Julian's phone lit up on the table, then Brittany's, then Nia's, then Todd's. They were notifications. Urgent alerts from their banking apps. Julian grabbed his phone. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He unlocked the screen. He stared at it. Alert account frozen. Alert overdraft protection revoked. Alert lien, hold applied. No, he whispered. No, no, no. He looked up at me. It says 0, he gasped. It says negative 85 million. Brittany checked her phone. She let out a wail of despair. My credit cards, she screamed. They are declined. All of them. I just got a notification from Amex. Card canceled. Nia was sobbing into Todd's shoulder. Todd was staring at the wall, catatonic. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I believe the transfer is complete. My children have received their inheritance. I looked back at Julian one last time. You wanted the mansion, the money, the company. I said, my voice hard as iron. You got them. You got the whole package, Julian. The assets and the debts. I buttoned my jacket. Welcome to the big leagues, son. I hope you know how to swim, because the water is very deep and the sharks are very hungry. I turned and walked toward the exit. The reporters were shouting questions now, sensing the blood in the water. The flashbulbs were popping again, but this time they weren't capturing a coronation. They were capturing a massacre. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening behind me. My children were drowning in the gold they had coveted, and I walked out into the sunlight a free man with nothing to my name but my dignity. And that was worth more than $85 million. The chaos in the courtroom wasn't just noise, it was the sound of a lifestyle dying. The air was thick with the smell of fear, a sour metallic scent that radiated from my children. They stood in the center of the room like statues crumbling under the weight of an invisible hammer. Then the sound changed. It shifted from the collective gasp of the audience to a digital symphony of destruction. Ringtone, vibration, ping. Julian's phone, which was still clutched in his trembling hand, began to ring. It wasn't a text message this time, it was a call. The screen flashed a name that Julian usually loved to see: Private Wealth Management. He answered it, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped the device. He put it to his ear, his eyes wide and glassy. "Hello," he stammered. "Look, there is a mistake. My app says—" He stopped. He listened. The color that had already drained from his face somehow drained further, leaving him looking like a corpse in a $5,000 suit. "What do you mean effective immediately?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You cannot do that. I am the CEO. I am—" He pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it in horror. "They hung up," he whispered. "They liquidated the margin account. They called the collateral." Before he could process that, another phone rang. Then another. It was a domino effect of financial ruin. Nia grabbed her purse, digging frantically for her phone. "It is the mortgage company," she screamed, looking at the screen. They say the automatic payment for the estate was rejected. They are initiating foreclosure proceedings on our current house." Todd, do something. Todd stood there paralyzed. His phone was buzzing in his pocket, but he didn't answer it. He didn't have to. He knew what it was. It was the sound of his sports car being repossessed. It was the sound of his country club membership being revoked. But the most violent reaction came from Brittany, my daughter-in-law. The woman who believed she was untouchable because she had married into the Coleman name didn't look at her bank app. Her survival instinct was sharper, more primal. She looked at the door. She realized before anyone else that the ship wasn't just sinking. It was already at the bottom of the ocean. She needed a lifeboat. She tapped furiously on her phone screen. I watched her. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was on a travel app. She was trying to book a one-way ticket to Paris or Dubai or anywhere that didn't have an extradition treaty with poverty. She hit a button. Her finger pressed down hard on the glass. Then she froze. She hit it again. Harder. "No!" she shrieked. A sound so high and piercing it made the court reporter wince. "No, no, no." "Try it again." She looked up at the room, her eyes wild. "It is declined," she yelled. "My black card, my limitless card, it is declined." She turned on Julian, hitting him in the chest with her phone. "Fix it, Julian," she screamed. "I am trying to book a flight. I need to get out of here. Fix it." Julian pushed her away. He looked like a man who had just woken up in a burning building. "I cannot fix it," he roared back at her. "Ow." "Don't you get it, Brittany? It is all gone. The bank. They froze everything. Even the joint accounts. Even your trust fund allowance. My trust fund—" Brittany gasped. "They cannot touch that. That is my money." "It was secured against the company assets," Marcus Sterling said calmly from beside me. His voice was the only steady thing in the room. "When you signed the spousal guarantee this morning, Mrs. Coleman, you pledged all personal liquid assets as collateral against the commercial loan. The bank is simply exercising its right to offset the debt." Brittany stared at him. Then she stared at her phone. The screen showed a red notification box. Transaction denied. Contact issuer. She threw the phone. It hit the floor and slid across the wood, coming to a stop at my feet. I looked down at it, a shiny piece of technology that was now as useless as a brick. I looked up at my family. They were huddled together, not out of love, but out of terror. They were a pack of wolves that had suddenly realized they were trapped in a cage with a tiger. Julian looked at me. His eyes were red, his breathing ragged. "Why?" he whispered. "Why did you do this, Dad? You said you were giving us the company. You said you were retiring." I stepped forward. I moved slowly, deliberately. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked like exactly what I was, a man who had built an empire from dirt and sweat, a man who knew the value of a dollar because he had bled for every single one. "I did give you the company, Julian." I said, my voice low and hard. "I gave you exactly what you asked for. But the debt," Julian cried. $85 million. "How could you have that much debt?" "The company was making money. The company was making money because I was running it," I replied. I walked closer to him, entering his personal space, forcing him to look at me, to really see me for the first time in years. "Do you know what a personal guarantee is, son?" I asked. Julian shook his head, mute. "It means trust," I said. It means that when I walked into a bank, I didn't need a spreadsheet. I didn't need a slide deck. I needed my name. Thaddeus Coleman. That name meant something. It meant that if the sky fell down, I would still find a way to pay my bills. It meant honor. It meant grit. I pointed a finger at his chest. The bank lent me $85 million to expand into Asia because they knew I would be there to steer the ship through the storm. They bet on the jockey, not the horse. I looked at Naya, I looked at Todd, I looked at Brittany. But today I stepped down, I left the building, and the moment I walked out that door, the bank looked at who was left in the captain's chair. I laughed a dry, humorless sound. And they saw you, Julian. They saw a gambler. They saw a playboy. They saw a man who has never finished a hard day's work in his life. And they got scared. They got terrified. They invoked the clause because they know what I know. What is that? Julian whispered, tears streaming down his face. That you are going to crash this company into the ground within 6 months, I said. The truth hung in the air, brutal and undeniable. So they called the loan, I continued. They want their money back now while there is still something left to take. And since you signed that paper, since you were so eager to take the credit, you also took the liability. My reputation was the shield, Julian. When I left, the shield vanished. And now the arrows are raining down. Good luck. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on the weeping daughter-in-law who had spilled water on me and laughed. I turned my back on the daughter who had tried to banish me to a guest house. I signaled to Marcus, "We are done here." We walked toward the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The press parted like the Red Sea. They didn't ask questions. They were too busy typing, too busy recording the carnage. They knew they were witnessing a tragedy of Greek proportions. Behind me, the screaming started again. "You did this!" Brittany shrieked at Julian. "You ruined my life! I am going to sue you! I am going to divorce you!" "Shut up!" Julian yelled back. "Just shut up! We have to call someone! We have to sell the cars!" "You cannot sell the cars!" Todd moaned. "The title is frozen. We cannot sell anything." Dad, Nia screamed, her voice breaking. "Dad, please come back. Don't leave us like this." I paused at the door. My hand rested on the brass handle. I felt the vibration of their panic in the floorboards. I thought about turning around. I thought about writing a check. I thought about saving them one last time. But then I remembered the photo of Viola. I remembered the years of disrespect. I remembered that they didn't want a father, they wanted a financier. I pushed the door open. I walked out into the hallway. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, muffling the screams, cutting off the sound of my family tearing itself apart. The hallway was quiet. It was empty. The marble floor stretched out before me, clean and bright. I took a deep breath. The air tasted different here. It tasted like freedom. I adjusted my tie. I checked my watch. It was 10:30 in the morning. I was 71 years old. I had no company. I had no mansion. I had no family. But as I walked toward the elevator, my step was light. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. I pressed the down button. Going down, Mr. Coleman Marcus asked quietly beside me. "No, Marcus," I said, watching the numbers light up. "We are going up. I have a lunch reservation at a little diner on 4th Street. They make the best grit cakes in the city, and they don't care what kind of suit you are wearing." The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside, and for the first time in a long time I smiled. A real smile. Let the wolves eat each other. The lion was going to get some lunch. 3 days after the courtroom massacre, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment. It was not a mansion. It did not have 5 acres of manicured gardens or a guest house for unwanted relatives. It was a 2-bedroom unit in a high-rise downtown with a concierge named Earl and a security system that required a fingerprint to operate. It was small. It was quiet. And for the first time in 40 years, it felt like a home because it was the only piece of property in the entire city that my children could not touch. I had bought it 5 years ago under a different LLC, a private pension fund that Marcus had set up for me. It was airtight. It was invisible to the banks, invisible to the creditors, and most importantly, invisible to Julian and Nia. Or at least it had been until they hired a private investigator with the last of their cash to find me. I was drinking a cup of Earl Grey tea, watching the sun go down over the city skyline. I could see the Coleman Tower in the distance, the building I had built, the building that was now the headquarters of a bankrupt empire. I wondered if the lights were still on, or if the power company had already pulled the plug. Then I heard it. The pounding. It was not a polite knock. It was a desperate rhythmic hammering on my front door. It sounded like the police or the fire department or someone running from a fire. But I knew who it was. I had been expecting them. I didn't rush. I took another sip of tea. I set the cup down on the saucer with a gentle clink. I stood up and smoothed the front of my cardigan. I walked to the door. I checked the security monitor. The camera feed showed the hallway in high definition. There they were, Julian and Nia. They looked like refugees from a war zone. Julian was wearing the same suit he had worn to court 3 days ago, but now it was wrinkled, stained with sweat, and God knows what else. His tie was gone. His shirt was unbuttoned to the sternum, exposing his chest. He looked thin, gaunt. His eyes were sunk deep into his skull, surrounded by dark purple bruises of exhaustion. He hadn't shaved. He looked like a man who had been awake for 72 hours screaming. Nia was worse. My daughter, the woman who wouldn't be caught dead without her pearls, was wearing a tracksuit that looked like she had slept in it. Her hair was matted. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her face was blotchy and red from crying. She was leaning against the wall as if her legs could no longer support the weight of her own bad decisions. They hammered again. Dad Julian screamed, his voice muffled by the heavy steel core door. "Dad, we know you are in there. Open up, please. Open the door." I disengaged the electronic lock, but I kept the heavy security chain in place. I opened the door 3 inches. The smell hit me first. It was the smell of fear, sour sweat, stale alcohol, and desperation. Dad, Nia sobbed, pushing her face into the crack of the door. "Oh, thank God." "Dad, let us in. You have to let us in." I looked at them through the gap. I didn't open the door further. I didn't step back to invite them into my sanctuary. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. "We need help." Julian gasped, pushing his face next to Nia's. "They are taking it all, Dad. Everything. The bank. They sent the eviction notice this morning. They are kicking us out of the penthouse. Tonight. They gave us 12 hours to vacate." He clawed at the door frame, his fingernails scratching the paint. "And the mansion." Nia wailed. "Todd says the sheriffs are coming tomorrow. They are going to padlock the gates. We have nowhere to go, Dad. We have no money. The accounts are still frozen. My cards don't work. I tried to buy formula for the baby. I tried to buy food, and I couldn't. She didn't have a baby. She was just lying out of habit, trying to elicit sympathy she didn't deserve." "I need cash," Julian said, his eyes wild. "Just a loan. 50,000, 10,000, anything. I need to pay a lawyer. I need to stop the seizure. Dad, you have money. We know you have a pension. Marcus said you were protected. Give us the money." I looked at my son, the new CEO, the king of Coleman Logistics. He was begging for scraps at my door. I took a sip of my tea. The steam curled up between us through the crack in the door. "I cannot help you," I said. "What do you mean you cannot help us?" Julian shouted, slamming his hand against the wood. "You are our father. You did this to us. You signed that paper. You knew about the debt." "I warned you," I said, my voice steady. "I told you running a company was hard. I told you heavy is the head that wears the crown. You wanted the crown, Julian. You wanted the title. Well, being the boss means you are responsible for the bills." "But 85 million, Nia cried. "We cannot pay that. Nobody can pay that." "I paid it," I said. "For 5 years. Every month. On time. Because I worked. I ran the trucks. I managed the logistics. I didn't spend my days playing golf and my nights gambling in the basement of a speakeasy." I leaned closer to the crack. "You wanted the power, Nia. You and your husband wanted to live in the big house. You kicked me out, remember? You sent me to the guest house. You said I was old. You said I was in the way." Nia flinched. "I am sorry, Dad. We were wrong. We were stupid. Just let us in. We can sleep on the floor. We can stay here until we figure this out." "No," I said. The word hung in the hallway like a gunshot. "No," Julian repeated, blinking as if he didn't understand the language. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean you are not coming in," I said. "This is my home, my retirement home, the one you said I should go to. Well, I am here, and I am retired." I took another sip of tea. "Retired people don't solve corporate bankruptcies," I continued. "Retired people don't bail out failed CEOs. Retired people watch the sunset and drink tea. Open the door!" Julian roared. His desperation turned into rage. He threw his shoulder against the door. The chain rattled, but it held. It was hardened steel installed by the best security firm in the city. "Open it or I will break it down," he screamed. "I will kill you, old man. I will take the money." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. "You are trespassing, Julian," I said. "I am your son," he yelled, spitting through the crack. "You are a trespasser," I corrected him. "And you are disturbing the peace." I reached behind the door and pressed a small red button on the wall. It was the direct line to the building's security desk. "Hello, Mr. Coleman," a voice crackled from the intercom. "Is everything all right?" "No, Earl," I said, speaking clearly so my children could hear. "I have 2 intruders on the 12th floor. They are attempting to force entry. They are making threats. Please remove them." "Intruders?" Nia gasped. "Dad, we are your children." "Not anymore," I said. "My children died a long time ago. They were replaced by vultures, and I don't let vultures in my house." "We are on our way," Mr. Coleman Earl said. Julian heard the voice from the intercom. He realized what was happening. He realized that the old man he thought was weak, the father he thought was a doormat, had just called the cavalry. "You called security on me," he hissed. "You broke into my building," I said. "You threatened me. What did you expect? A hug?" "You are evil," Julian spat. "You are a monster." "I am a mirror, Julian," I replied. "I am just reflecting what you showed me. You wanted a business relationship. You wanted a transaction. Well, this is business, and you are bad for business." The elevator chimed at the end of the hall. Heavy footsteps approached. Fast, disciplined. Julian turned his head. He saw them coming. 2 men, big men in dark uniforms. They weren't the polite mall cops. They were private security professionals, former military hired to protect the wealthy residents of this building from exactly this kind of riffraff. "Let's go, sir," the first guard said, his voice deep and commanding. He put a hand on Julian's shoulder. "Get your hands off me," Julian shouted, trying to shrug him off. "Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Coleman Logistics. I own this town." "You own a foreclosure notice, sir," the guard said, unimpressed. "And right now you are owning a ride to the curb." The guard grabbed Julian's arm and twisted it behind his back. Julian howled in pain. Nia tried to run, but the second guard caught her. "Please," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't hurt him." "Dad, tell them to stop." I watched through the crack in the door. I watched my son being manhandled. I watched my daughter weeping. I felt a twinge in my chest. The ghost of the father I used to be wanted to open the door, wanted to write the check, wanted to save them one last time. But then I looked at Julian's face. Even as he was being dragged away, he was looking at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He wasn't sorry. He was just angry he got caught. He was angry the money tap had been turned off. If I opened that door, they wouldn't hug me. They would rob me. They would strip this apartment bare, just like they tried to strip the company. I stayed silent. "Get them out of here," I told the guard, "and tell the front desk that if they ever come back, I want the police called." "You got it, Mr. Coleman," the guard said. They dragged them toward the elevator. Julian was kicking and screaming, cursing my name, cursing the world. Nia was sobbing, a broken heap of entitlement. The elevator doors opened. They were shoved inside. The doors closed, cutting off the noise. Silence returned to the hallway. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I put the chain back on. I walked back to the balcony. My tea was cold. I poured it into the sink and poured myself a glass of bourbon instead. I went back outside. The sun had set. The city was a grid of lights. Somewhere down there in the dark streets, my children were standing on the sidewalk, homeless, penniless, and alone. I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned on the way down, a good clean burn. They were learning. It was a harsh lesson, a brutal lesson, but it was the only one that would stick. I wasn't their savior anymore. I wasn't their bank. I was just a retired truck driver watching the world turn. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about the future. Because the future wasn't my problem anymore. It was theirs. The security cameras in my old mansion were state-of-the-art. I had installed them myself years ago, not to spy on my family, but to protect them. I wanted to make sure they were safe from the outside world. I never imagined that one day I would be sitting in my apartment 10 miles away watching those same cameras capture the moment my family destroyed itself from the inside. It was 10 o'clock at night. The Coleman estate should have been blazing with light. The chandeliers in the foyer should have been sparkling. The landscape lighting should have been illuminating the oak trees I planted with Viola. But on my screen, the house was a tomb. It was pitch black. The power company had cut the electricity at 6 p.m. The water had been shut off an hour later. My children, who thought they were kings and queens, were sitting in the dark in a $10 million house that had become a prison. I zoomed in on the living room camera. The infrared night vision turned the scene into a ghostly green and black nightmare. Nia was sitting on the floor, wrapped in a mink coat that she hadn't paid for. She was shivering. The heating system was off and the house was losing warmth fast. Todd was pacing back and forth, using the flashlight on his dying phone to navigate the room. Then the front door smashed open. It wasn't the police. It was Brittany. She didn't knock. She didn't use a key. She had thrown a landscaping rock through the glass panel of the side door and climbed in. She stormed into the living room, her hair wild, her designer dress torn at the hem. She looked like a banshee. "Where is he?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Where is your brother?" Nia looked up, blinking in the sudden glare of Brittany's phone light. "He is not here, Brittany," Nia whispered, her voice hoarse. "He went to beg Dad for money." Beg. Brittany laughed, a manic, terrifying sound. "He went to beg. And look where it got us. Look at this place, Nia. It is a mausoleum." She shined her light around the room. The beam landed on the grand piano. There was a bright orange sticker slapped onto the polished wood. "Seized property. Do not remove." The light moved to the sofa. Another sticker. The antique clock. Another sticker. "The marshals were here this afternoon," Brittany spat. "They tagged everything. They gave us 24 hours to vacate before they changed the locks. And you know what they told me? They told me my car is gone. They towed it from the driveway while I was inside packing my shoes." She turned the light back on Nia, blinding her. "This is your fault," she screamed. "My fault," Nia cried, standing up, the mink coat slipping off her shoulders. "How is this my fault?" "You put the idea in his head," Brittany yelled, advancing on her sister-in-law. "You told Julian that Thad was weak. You told him that now was the time to strike. You wanted the house, Nia. You wanted the estate so bad you could taste it. Well, taste it now. How does it taste? Does it taste like bankruptcy?" "I didn't do anything," Nia shouted back, backing away. "Julian is the CEO. He is the one who signed the papers. He is the one who didn't read the contract." "He didn't read it because he trusted you," Brittany shrieked. "You said Todd looked at the numbers. You said it was a gold mine." She lunged at Nia, grabbing her by the shoulders. They grappled in the dark, stumbling over the seized furniture. It was pathetic. Two women who had spent their lives getting manicures and judging others, now fighting like stray cats in an alley. "Get off her!" Todd shouted, rushing forward. He pulled Brittany away, shoving her hard. She fell back onto the sofa dust, rising from the cushions. "Don't touch my wife," Todd warned, shining his light in Brittany's face. "Oh, look who it is," Brittany sneered, shielding her eyes. "The financial genius, the man who couldn't sell ice in a desert. Where is your brilliant plan now, Todd? Where is the villa in St. Bart's?" "I am working on it," Todd said, his voice trembling with false bravado. "I am making calls. You are making nothing," Brittany spat. "You are a loser, Todd. You always were. Julian only kept you around because you were useful." A useful idiot. Just then the front door opened again. Julian stumbled in. He had walked 10 miles from my apartment downtown because he didn't have money for a cab and his Uber account was suspended. He was drenched in sweat, his suit ruined, his feet bleeding inside his expensive shoes. He looked at the scene before him, his wife on the floor, his sister shivering, his brother-in-law holding a flashlight like a weapon. "Did he give you the money?" Nia asked, rushing to him. "Did Dad give you the cash?" Julian shook his head slowly. He collapsed onto the bottom step of the grand staircase. "No," he whispered. "He called security. He threw me out." Nia let out a wail of despair. Brittany started laughing again, that same unhinged sound. "Of course he did," she cackled. "Of course he did. We are dead. We are legally dead." Todd didn't say anything. He was staring at Julian. He was holding his phone, which had just chimed with a notification. It wasn't a bank alert this time. It was a credit monitoring alert. Julian, Todd said, his voice low and dangerous. Julian didn't look up. "What do you want, Todd? Leave me alone." "Why did I just get an email from Experian?" Todd asked, stepping closer, the flashlight beam shaking in his hand. "I don't know," Julian mumbled. "Maybe your credit score finally hit 0. No, Todd said. It says there was a hard inquiry on my credit report yesterday for a payday loan, a high-risk emergency loan. Julian stiffened. I saw it on the camera. His posture changed from defeated to defensive. So what? Julian said. Identity theft happens. It says the loan was approved. Todd continued, his voice rising. $50,000, deposited into an account ending in 4492. Todd shined the light directly into Julian's face. That is your offshore account, Julian, the one you told me to set up for tax purposes. Julian shielded his eyes. Put the light down, Todd. You are blinded me. You took out a loan in my name, Todd screamed. You committed identity theft against me, your own brother-in-law. I had to, Julian shouted, jumping up. Vinny was going to break my legs. I needed cash to pay the VIG. I used your info because my credit was already frozen. I was going to pay you back. Pay me back, Todd roared. With what? With Monopoly money. You ruined me, Julian. I trusted you. You said we were partners. I am the CEO. Julian yelled back, pushing Todd away. I did what I had to do to protect the family. If Vinny kills me, who is going to fix this? Todd didn't listen. He snapped. The frustration, the fear, the humiliation of the last 3 days boiled over. He dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, creating a spinning strobe effect of light and shadow. Todd lunged at Julian. He tackled him onto the stairs. They rolled down the steps, a tangle of limbs and expensive fabric. They hit the floor hard. Todd punched Julian in the face. A sickening thud echoed through the silent house. You thief! Todd screamed, punching him again. You liar! Julian fought back. He clawed at Todd's face. He kicked him in the stomach. Stop it, Nia screamed, trying to pull Todd off. Stop it! You are killing him! Brittany just sat on the sofa watching. She didn't move to help her husband. She watched with cold, detached fascination as the two men who had promised her the world beat each other bloody on the floor of a repossessed mansion. I sat in my apartment watching the screen. I sipped my bourbon. This was it. This was the bottom. They weren't fighting over the company anymore. They weren't fighting for power. They were fighting because they had nothing left to lose. They were rats in a sinking ship eating each other to survive for one more minute. Julian managed to kick Todd off. He scrambled backward, crab walking across the floor, blood streaming from his nose. Stay away from me, he panted. I am warning you. You are warning me. Todd spat, spitting blood onto the marble floor. You have nothing, Julian. You are less than nothing. You stole my identity. I am going to the police. Go ahead. Julian laughed hysterically, wiping blood from his mouth. Go to the police. Tell them everything. Tell them about the bribes you paid to the inspectors last year. Tell them about the tax evasion scheme you set up for the shell companies. If I go down, Todd, you are coming with me. We are all going down. The room went silent. The truth hung in the air like smoke. They were all complicit. They were all guilty. There was no innocent party here. Brittany stood up slowly. She walked over to where the flashlight had rolled. She picked it up. She shined it on the wall. On the wall hung a large portrait of the family. Me, Viola, Julian, Nia. It was taken 10 years ago. We looked happy. We looked like a family. Brittany walked up to the portrait. She took the heavy flashlight and smashed the glass. Crack. The sound was loud in the empty house. It is over, she whispered. She turned the light on Julian, then on Nia, then on Todd. Do you realize what Thad did? She asked, her voice hollow. He didn't just take the money. She walked to the center of the room, stepping over the broken glass. He gave us the debt, she said. $85 million, plus interest, plus penalties. She looked at Julian. Even if we sell everything, even if we sell the clothes on our backs, even if we work for the rest of our lives, we can never pay it back. She laughed, a soft, broken sound. We are not just poor, Julian. Poor people can start over. Poor people can get a job at McDonald's and save money. We are worse than poor. We are buried. We are slaves. Every dollar we ever earn for the rest of our lives belongs to the bank. We will never own a car again. We will never own a house again. We will never even own a credit card. Julian looked at her. He realized she was right. The debt was personal, unlimited. It followed them. It was a chain around their necks that would drag them down until the day they died. Nia sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. Dad, she whispered. Dad, what have you done to us? I reached for the remote control in my apartment. I had seen enough. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. I felt a profound sadness. Sadness that it had come to this. Sadness that the only way to save their souls was to destroy their lives, but I also felt resolve. They needed to hit the bottom, and this was the bottom. I pressed the button. The screen went black. The connection was cut. I left them in the dark, in the cold, in the ruins of the empire they had tried to steal. Tomorrow the sheriffs would come. Tomorrow reality would arrive with a padlock and an eviction notice. But for tonight they had each other, and that was the worst punishment of all. The banks are cold institutions. They fight with paper. They fight with lawyers and liens and foreclosure notices. They can take your house, they can take your car, they can ruin your credit score. But they cannot touch your skin. They operate within the lines of the law, even if those lines feel like a noose. But Julian did not just owe money to the banks. I had known for years about his gambling. It started with poker in college, then moved to sports betting, then to high-stakes underground games in the back rooms of cigar bars in Buckhead. I had bailed him out twice. Both times he swore on his mother's grave that he was done. Both times he cried and promised to go to meetings. But an addict does not stop because he promises. He stops when he hits a wall. And the wall Julian hit was named Vinny. Vinny was not a banker. He did not care about the accelerated payment clause. He did not care about the SEC or the bankruptcy courts. Vinny ran a syndicate out of a shipping container in the darkest part of the rail yards, the part where the security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned every night. He dealt in cash and he collected in blood. It was 3 in the morning when my phone rang. I was awake. I had been awake for hours, sitting in my armchair, staring at the city lights, wondering where my children were sleeping. The apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy like a wool blanket. When the phone buzzed on the side table, it sounded like a scream. I picked it up. The number was blocked. My heart hammered against my ribs. A father's instinct never truly dies, even when his children are dead to him. I knew something was wrong. This wasn't a drunk dial from Julian. This was something darker. I slid my thumb across the screen. "Hello? Dad?" The voice was a jagged, broken whisper. It didn't sound like Julian. It sounded like an animal caught in a trap. "Dad, help me." "Oh God, Dad, please." "Julian," I said, sitting up straighter. "Where are you?" I don't know. It is dark. They took me." I was walking down the road away from the mansion. A van pulled up. "Dad, they broke my fingers." 2 of them. I heard a sound in the background, a heavy, wet thud like meat hitting concrete. Then Julian screamed. It was a high-pitched shriek of pure agony that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Shut up, the snitch," a deep voice growled in the background. Then there was a rustling sound and the phone was taken away. A new voice came on the line, calm, professional, terrifying. "Mr. Coleman, who is this?" I asked, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned gray. "Names don't matter," the voice said. "What matters is the $5 million your son owes my employer." I took a breath. I knew this day would come. I had nightmares about this day for 10 years. "He told us he was the CEO," the voice continued. "He told us he had the keys to the kingdom. He said he was good for it. He said he would wire the funds on Friday." I closed my eyes. Julian had borrowed against a future he didn't own. He had gambled with money he hadn't stolen yet. "Friday came and went," Mr. Coleman, the voice said. "We tried to run his accounts frozen. We tried to seize his assets, liens. It seems like someone beat us to the punch." "That would be the bank," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We don't care about the bank," the voice said, hardening. "We want our principal, $5 million, plus interest. Since he missed the deadline, the interest is now, let's call it a finger a day." I felt a wave of nausea. I imagined Julian tied to a chair in some damp warehouse crying for his father. "I want to speak to him," I said. "Put him on the voice," commanded someone else. "Dad." Julian was sobbing now, uncontrollable ragged breaths. "Dad, you have to pay them. They are going to kill me. They have a hammer, Dad. A sledgehammer. They said if they don't get the money in an hour, they are going to start on my knees." I closed my eyes. I could hear the terror in his voice. It was real. For the first time in his life, Julian wasn't acting. "Dad, please, Julian begged. I know you have money, the pension fund, Marcus told me about it. It is protected. You have millions in there. Just wire it. I will pay you back. I swear I will work for the rest of my life to pay you back. I listened to him beg. I listened to him promise the same empty promises he had made 1,000 times before, and I realized something terrifying. If I paid them, they would let him go, and he would go right back to the table. He would gamble again. He would lose again. And next time the debt would be 10 million. If I paid them, I wasn't saving his life. I was just buying him a little more time to destroy himself. I took a deep breath. It rattled in my chest. Put the man back on, I said. No, Dad. Wait, Julian screamed. Don't hang up. Put him on, I roared. The rustling sound came back. Smart man, the voice said. We accept wire transfers or crypto. I will text you the wallet address. You have 1 hour. I don't need the address, I said. There was a pause. The silence on the line was thick with menace. Excuse me, the voice asked. I don't need the address. I repeated, my voice cold and flat, because I am not sending you any money. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Coleman, perhaps you don't understand the situation. We have your son. We are not the IRS. We don't send audit letters. We send pieces. I understand perfectly, I said. You are a businessman. I am a businessman. Let's talk business. My son told you he was the CEO of Coleman Logistics. He told you he was rich. He lied. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that didn't care about one broken man. He is broke, I said. He has $85 million in debt to the bank. He has no assets. He has no home. He has nothing. And as for me, I continued, I am a retired old man living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I gave the company to him. I signed it all away. You can check the court records. It was in all the papers. I don't have $5 million lying around under my mattress. I lied. And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to a criminal enterprise to fuel a drug habit or a gambling addiction. You are bluffing, the voice said, but I heard a flicker of doubt. We know who you are. Thaddeus Coleman. You built that city. I built it. I agreed, and then I gave it away. Look at the news. I am washed up. I am yesterday's news. So here's the situation, I said, leaning into the phone, channeling every ounce of grit I had left from my days on the loading docks. You are holding a liability. Julian is worthless to you. If you kill him, you get nothing. If you hurt him, you get nothing. You are wasting your time and your resources on a man who cannot pay. So he dies, the voice snarled. Then he dies, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. They were the hardest words I had ever spoken. If he dies, I continued, my voice not wavering, he dies because of his own choices. He dies because he borrowed money he couldn't pay. That is between him and you. Dad, Julian screamed in the background, a sound of pure betrayal. Dad, no. I gripped the phone until the plastic creaked. Do not call me again, I said. I hung up. I stood there in the silence of my apartment. My hand was shaking so bad I had to put the phone down on the table before I dropped it. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I had just told a murderer to kill my son. I walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I drank it in one gulp, but my throat was still dry. I wasn't a monster. I was a father, and sometimes being a father means letting your child face the fire they started. But I wasn't going to just let him die. I picked up the phone again. I didn't dial the bank. I didn't dial Marcus. I dialed 911. Emergency, the operator answered. My name is Thaddeus Coleman. I said, my voice calm and authoritative, the voice of a CEO taking control of a disaster. I want to report a kidnapping in progress. My son Julian Coleman has been abducted. He is being held for ransom. The operator started asking questions. Description, location. I don't know the location, I said, but I know the phone number they called from. And I know who he owes money to. His name is Vinny. He operates out of the shipping yards. Sector 4, near the old crane. How do you know this, sir? The operator asked. Because I used to run those yards, I said. And I know where the rats hide. They demanded $5 million, I continued. They threatened to kill him in 1 hour. Are you going to pay the ransom, sir? The operator asked. We advise against... I cut her off. I am not paying a dime, I said. I am sending you the number. Track it. Send the SWAT team. Send the hostage negotiators. Do whatever you have to do. But understand this. I am not negotiating with them, and I am not bailing him out. I gave the operator the details. I stayed on the line until the police confirmed they had a fix on the signal. They were moving in. When I finally hung up, the sun was starting to rise. A gray light filtered through the curtains. I sat back down in my chair. I had done what the law required. I had done what a citizen should do. But I had not done what a father usually does. I sat there and I waited. I waited to hear if my son was going to come out of this in a police car or a body bag. And the terrible truth was, part of me didn't know which one would be better. If he died, he was a tragedy. If he lived, he was a ruin. I looked at the picture of Viola on the mantelpiece. "I am sorry, love," I whispered, "but I cannot save him from himself anymore. The bill is due, and he has to pay it." I closed my eyes and listened to the sirens wailing in the distance, moving toward the rail yards, moving toward the reckoning. The police raid on the shipping yard was a success in the sense that nobody died. The SWAT team kicked down the door of the rusted container just as Vinny's men were heating up a pair of pliers. They found Julian zip-tied to a chair, weeping and smelling of urine, his expensive suit ruined and 2 of his fingers broken at unnatural angles. He was alive, but he was not the same man who had walked into the courthouse. He was a shell, a broken thing that had looked into the abyss and blinked. I did not go to the hospital to see him. I sent Marcus to handle the police report and to make sure the doctors set the bones correctly. I stayed in my apartment. I told myself it was because I was angry. I told myself it was because he needed to learn. But the truth was, I couldn't bear to see the fear in his eyes and know that I was the one who let it happen. The next morning, my intercom buzzed again. I expected the press. I expected the police. But the camera showed a woman holding a child. It was Brittany, and she was holding Leo, my 3-year-old grandson. Brittany looked different. Gone were the designer dresses and the flawless makeup. She was wearing jeans and an oversized gray sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like a tired mother. She looked sympathetic. It was a costume, of course. Brittany never wore gray unless it was cashmere. This was polyester. She was dressing the part of the destitute victim. I buzzed her up. Not for her, but for Leo. When she walked into my apartment, she didn't scream or demand. She stood in the entryway, clutching Leo to her chest like a shield. Leo was sucking his thumb, his big brown eyes looking around the strange room. He didn't know his father was in a hospital bed. He didn't know his mother was a shark in a sweater. He just knew his world had gotten cold and loud. "Hello, Thad," Brittany whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at her. I looked at the way she held the boy. It wasn't a hug. It was a grip. She was holding him the way a soldier holds a hostage. "Come in, Brittany," I said. "Put the boy down. He looks heavy." She walked into the living room, but she didn't put him down. She sat on the edge of the sofa, balancing him on her lap. She wanted me to see him. She wanted me to look at his innocent face and feel the guilt rising in my throat. "We have nowhere to go, Thad," she said, tears welling up in her eyes, perfectly timed. "The marshals locked the townhouse an hour ago. They took the keys. They took the car seats. We took an Uber here. It was the last $20 on my emergency card." She looked down at Leo, stroking his hair. "He is hungry, Thad. He hasn't eaten since yesterday. We slept in a motel last night, a dirty place by the highway. There were bugs." She looked up at me, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "You can hate me. You can hate Julian, but you cannot hate him. He is your blood. He is a Coleman. Are you really going to let your grandson sleep on the street? Are you going to let him starve because his father is an idiot?" It was a good speech, effective. It hit all the right notes. I looked at Leo. He looked back at me and smiled a shy little smile. "Pop, Pop," he said, reaching out a chubby hand. My heart cracked. Just a little. This was the collateral damage I had feared. This was the innocent victim of my war. I walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and took out a carton of juice and some crackers I kept for myself. I brought them over and handed them to Leo. He grabbed them greedily, tearing into the package. "Thank you," Brittany sobbed. "Thank you. I knew you had a heart. I knew you wouldn't abandon us." She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. "I am not abandoning him," I said. "So you will help us?" she asked, hope flaring in her eyes. "You will give us money, just enough to get a place, a small apartment, maybe get the car back. Julian needs rehab. Thad, he needs expensive doctors for his hands. We need—" I held up a hand. I held up a— "Stop," she froze. "I am not giving you money for Julian," I said. "I am not giving you money to restart your life as a socialite." I walked to my desk. I opened the top drawer. Inside sat a thick manila envelope. I had prepared it the day I signed the transfer papers. Marcus had called me paranoid. I called it preparation. I picked up the envelope and walked back to her. I handed it to her. It was heavy. "What is this?" she asked, feeling the weight of it. "Open it," I said. She tore open the flap. Inside were two things: a stack of cash bound in rubber bands, $50,000 in hundreds, and a set of documents. She looked at the cash first. Her eyes widened. Her breathing hitched. For a second the mask slipped and I saw the greed, the pure hunger of the addict looking at the needle. Then she looked at the papers. Flight itinerary, she read. One way, to Seattle, departing tonight at 8 p.m. for Brittany and Leo Coleman. She frowned. Seattle. Why Seattle? Because it is 3,000 miles away from Atlanta, I said. Because it is far away from the creditors, far away from the scandal, and far away from Julian. She pulled out the second document. It was a legal filing. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She looked up at me shocked. Divorce papers, she whispered. I sat down in the chair opposite her. Here is the deal, Brittany, I said, my voice low and hard. That envelope contains $50,000. It is enough to rent a decent apartment in Seattle, enough to buy a used car, enough to buy food and clothes for Leo for 6 months while you find a job. I pointed at the cash. But there is a condition. What condition? She asked, her fingers tightening around the money. You take the boy. You get on that plane tonight. You file those papers tomorrow, and you never come back to Julian. I leaned forward. You choose right now, Brittany. You can be a loyal wife. You can stay here in Atlanta with your husband. You can wait for him to get out of the hospital. You can share his debt. You can share his shame. You can live in that motel with the bugs and dodge the phone calls from Vinny's friends who might decide that broken fingers aren't enough payment. Or I said, pointing to the door, you can be a mother. You can save yourself. You can save Leo. You can walk out of here with a fresh start and a clean slate. But you cannot have both. You cannot have the money and the husband. The room was silent except for the sound of Leo crunching on a cracker. Brittany looked at the money. $50,000. It wasn't the millions she was used to. It wasn't enough for a Chanel bag and a first-class ticket. But right now, in her world of zero balances and frozen assets, it was a fortune. It was oxygen. She looked at the divorce papers. She looked at Leo. Then she looked at me. I expected her to argue. I expected her to say she loved him. I expected her to say that marriage was a vow for better or for worse. I expected some resistance, some flicker of loyalty to the man she had promised to spend her life with. But there was none. She didn't even blink. She put the papers back in the envelope. She tucked the cash deep inside. She closed the flap. What time is the flight? She asked. 8 p.m., I said. Marcus has a car waiting downstairs to take you to the airport. She stood up. She smoothed her sweater. She picked up Leo, who whined a little at being moved from his snacks. Shh, baby, she said to him, her voice bright and efficient. We are going on an adventure. We are going on a big plane. She didn't look back at the door where she had entered begging for her husband's life. She didn't ask about Julian's injuries. She didn't ask if he was in pain. She didn't ask if he would have anyone to hold his hand. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob. She turned to me. He was a loser anyway, she said. She didn't say it with anger. She said it with the cold, practical assessment of a woman discarding a broken appliance. Tell him, actually don't tell him anything. It is better if he figures it out. She opened the door and walked out. I watched her go. I watched my grandson disappear into the hallway, carried away by a woman who loved survival more than she loved anything else. I closed the door. I locked it. I felt sick. Sick that I was right. Sick that my son had married a woman who would sell him for 50 grand and a plane ticket. But I had saved the boy. Leo was gone. He was safe. He wouldn't grow up watching his father get beaten by loan sharks. He wouldn't grow up in the shadow of the Coleman disgrace. Now there was only one loose end left. I picked up my phone. I called the hospital. I need to speak to the nurse on the 4th floor, I said. The trauma unit. Room 412. Julian Coleman. A moment later, a nurse came on the line. This is Thaddeus Coleman, I said. Is my son awake? He just woke up, sir. The nurse said, her voice soft. He is in a lot of pain. He is asking for his wife. He keeps asking where Brittany is. I took a deep breath. I need you to deliver a message, I said. There is a packet at the front desk. Marcus Sterling dropped it off an hour ago. It contains a legal summons. A summons, sir, the nurse asked, confused. Just give it to him, I said. And tell him his wife came to see me. Tell him she chose the future. I hung up. I walked to the window. The sun was high in the sky now, a bright, brutal light that exposed everything. Across town, in a sterile hospital room smelling of antiseptic and regret, Julian was about to wake up. He was going to look for the hand of the woman he loved. He was going to look for the face of his child. And he was going to find nothing but a piece of paper and the empty space where his life used to be. He had lost his company. He had lost his money. He had lost his dignity. And now he was about to find out that he had lost the only two people in the world who were supposed to stay. The house of cards had fallen, and he was buried under the wreckage alone. Desperation is a funny thing. It makes smart people do stupid things, and it makes stupid people do dangerous things. My son-in-law Todd was never smart. He was a man who thought he was playing chess when he was actually eating the checkers. And my daughter Nia, she was not stupid, but she was pliable. She was clay in the hands of a man who promised her the world while picking her pocket. With Julian in the hospital and Brittany fleeing the state, the crown of Coleman Logistics had fallen to them. But it was a heavy crown. It was made of lead, and it was crushing them. The bank accounts were frozen. The mansion was dark. The cars were gone. They were standing in the wreckage of the empire I had built, and instead of trying to fix the engine, they decided to strip the copper wiring from the walls. It started on Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my apartment with Marcus Sterling. We were drinking coffee and watching the internal server logs of the company. I still had access. They had fired the board, but they forgot to fire the IT director who had been my fishing buddy for 20 years. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to the screen. They are in the system. They are trying to initiate a liquidation sale. I leaned forward. They were listing the Blue Fleet, 50 refrigerated trucks, the pride of the company. These were state-of-the-art vehicles worth $200,000 each, and Todd had listed them for $50,000 apiece, a fire sale. They are trying to cash out, I said. They want a quick million to run away with. They didn't understand the law. They didn't understand that when you owe the bank $85 million, you don't own the trucks anymore. You are just driving them for the bank. Let's go down there, Marcus, I said. I want to see this. We drove to the headquarters. The parking lot was empty. Most of the employees had walked out when the payroll checks bounced on Monday. The building felt like a ghost town. We walked into the executive conference room. Nia and Todd were there. They were arguing with a man in a greasy suit, a liquidator named Miller who bought distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. Signed the paper. Miller was saying, I have the wire ready, $2.5 million for the whole fleet, cash, today. Todd was holding a pen, his hand shaking. Do it, Nia, he urged. Just sign it. We take the money and we go to Mexico. We can live like kings in Tulum. Nia looked terrified. But Dad, she whispered. Dad isn't here, Todd snapped. We are the owners. Sign it. Nia lowered the pen to the paper. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Marcus Sterling announced, his voice booming from the doorway. Todd jumped, dropping the pen. Nia let out a small scream. They spun around to see me and Marcus standing there like the ghosts of Christmas past. You, Todd shouted, his face turning red. Get out! You are trespassing. I am the CEO now. Technically, Marcus said, walking into the room, you are the co-owner of a company in default. And under the bylaws of Coleman Logistics, specifically Article 12, Section 4, there is a little provision your father-in-law insisted on keeping. Todd narrowed his eyes. What provision? The honorary founder's veto, Marcus said calmly. He placed a document on the table. It states that in the event of financial distress defined as a debt-to-equity ratio exceeding 80%, the honorary founder Thaddeus Coleman retains veto power over the sale of any asset exceeding $10,000. Todd stared at him. He looked at me. You are joking, he spat. You gave us the company. I gave you the shares, I said, stepping forward. I gave you the debt, but I kept the brakes, because I knew you would try to drive the car off a cliff. I looked at the liquidator. Mr. Miller, I said, I believe you know my reputation. Those trucks are collateral for a secured loan. If you buy them, you are receiving stolen property, and I will personally see to it that you are indicted for conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Miller turned pale. He grabbed his briefcase. "I am out," he said, standing up. "I don't do federal cases. Good luck, kids." He ran out of the room faster than a rat leaving a sinking ship. Todd screamed. He swept the papers off the table. "You are ruining us," he yelled at me. "You want us to starve." "We need that money, Thad. We have nothing." "You have a job," I said. "The company is still operating. The contracts are still valid. If you work hard, if you manage the routes, you can generate revenue. You can pay the bank. You can dig your way out." "Work?" Todd scoffed. "You expect us to drive the trucks. You expect us to manage the warehouse. We are executives, Thad. We don't do manual labor." "Then you starve," I said. I turned and walked out. Marcus followed me. We blocked the legal sale. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they would give up and file for bankruptcy, but I underestimated Todd's stupidity, and I underestimated Nia's desperation. That night my phone rang. It was my old head of security, Big Mike. He still worked the night shift at the main depot. "Mr. Coleman." Mike whispered, "You need to see this. They are at the yard." Who, I asked. Nia and Todd. And they brought some guys. Rough-looking guys. They are loading the electronics shipment onto a truck. An unmarked truck. The electronics shipment. Samsung televisions. High-end laptops. It was a contract worth $4 million. They weren't trying to sell the company assets anymore. They were stealing the client's cargo. "Call the police, Mike," I said. "I already did," Mike replied. "But Mr. Coleman, it is your daughter." I closed my eyes. I felt a tear leak out. It was hot and bitter. "She isn't my daughter tonight, Mike," I said, my voice cracking. "Tonight she is a thief. Let them do their job." I drove to the depot. I parked across the street in the shadows. I watched. I saw Todd waving his arms, directing 3 men in hoodies. They were throwing boxes into the back of a rental truck. Not a Coleman truck. A rental. They were stealing the inventory to sell on the black market. Nia was standing by the car, keeping watch. She was shivering. She looked sick. She knew this was wrong. She knew this was a felony, but she was too weak to stop him. Todd was manic. Faster, he hissed. "We have to be out of here in 10 minutes. He was calculating the money in his head. $4 million in goods. He would get maybe $500,000 from a fence. Enough to run, enough to hide. He didn't see the police cars approaching with their lights off. I saw them. 4 cruisers gliding silently down the industrial road like sharks in dark water. I could have honked my horn. I could have flashed my lights. I could have warned them. But I sat on my hands. They had made their choice. They had rejected the hard work. They had rejected the honest path. They wanted the shortcut. The police hit the lights all at once. Blue and red exploded in the darkness, blinding them. "Freeze, police." The men in hoodies ran. They scattered into the night, leaping over fences. They were professionals. They knew the drill. But Todd and Nia were not professionals. They froze. Todd dropped a box of laptops. It shattered on the asphalt. He put his hands up, shielding his eyes from the spotlight. "It is a misunderstanding," he screamed. "I am the owner. I am allowed to take this." "Get on the ground," the officer shouted, leveling a weapon at him. Nia screamed. She fell to her knees, her hands over her head. "Daddy," she wailed into the night. "Daddy, help me." I watched from my car. I watched the officer cuff Todd. I watched them drag him to the cruiser, kicking and spitting, claiming he had immunity, claiming it was all my fault. I watched a female officer approach Nia. She helped her up. She was gentle, but she was firm. She put the cuffs on my daughter's wrists. The click of the metal echoed in the empty yard. I watched them put Nia in the back of a separate car. She looked out the window. Her face was pressed against the glass. She looked right at my car. She couldn't see me through the tint and the darkness, but she knew I was there. I started my engine. Marcus was on speakerphone. "They got them," Marcus said quietly. "What are the charges?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Grand larceny," Marcus listed. "Defrauding a secured creditor. Interstate commerce fraud. And since the cargo was insured federally, wire fraud." "How long?" I asked. "Todd is looking at 10 years minimum," Marcus said. "Nia, maybe 5 if she cooperates, if she testifies against him." I watched the police cars drive away, their lights fading into the distance. They were gone. My family was gone. Julian was in the hospital, broken by loan sharks. Brittany was in Seattle, starting over with my money. Todd and Nia were in a holding cell facing federal time. I was the last man standing. I drove home slowly. The city was quiet. The empire I had built was safe from them now. But the cost was everything I had ever loved. I walked into my apartment. I poured a drink. I sat in the dark. I had won. But as I sat there listening to the silence, I realized that winning feels a lot like losing when you are the only one left to celebrate. My children wanted the easy way out. Well, they found it. Prison is very easy. You don't have to work. You don't have to pay bills. You don't have to make decisions. I gave them exactly what they wanted, a life without responsibility. And tomorrow I would wake up and go to work, because that is what Coleman men do, even when we are the only ones left. Federal bankruptcy court is a depressing place. It does not smell like justice. It smells of stale coffee, cheap floor wax, and broken dreams. It is where people come when they have run out of road, when the math finally defeats the hope. 3 months had passed since the raid at the shipping yard. 3 months since my family imploded. Julian had been released from the hospital, his fingers pinned and plated, his ego shattered. Nia and Todd were out on bail pending their criminal trial for the theft, but their assets remained frozen. They were living in a cheap extended stay motel on the outskirts of town, paid for by the state's emergency housing fund. I sat in the back row of courtroom 4B. I was wearing a simple navy suit. I held a fedora in my lap. I watched them walk in. They looked like ghosts of the people I once knew. Julian was thin. His suit was the same one he had worn for weeks, shining at the elbows and smelling of smoke. His cast was gone, but his hand was stiff claw-like. He held it against his chest protectively. Nia had lost her glow. Her roots were showing gray streaks in her expensive dye job. She wore no makeup. Her eyes were dull, lifeless. She didn't look like a princess anymore. She looked like a tired, middle-aged woman who had forgotten how to smile. Todd walked behind them, shuffling his feet. He looked angry. He looked like a man who was still trying to find someone to blame. They sat at the defendant's table, huddled together. Their court-appointed bankruptcy trustee, a weary man named Mr. Clark, was stacking papers in front of them. "All rise," the bailiff droned. Judge Abernathy, the same judge who had overseen the transfer of the company, walked in. She looked at the file. She looked at my children. She sighed. "We are here for the final liquidation hearing in the matter of Julian Coleman, Nia Coleman, and Todd Smith," she said. "The debts are substantial. The assets are complicated, Mr." Clark stood up. "Your Honor, the liabilities exceed $85 million. The debtors have no income. Their primary residence has been foreclosed. The company Coleman Logistics is currently in receivership." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "However, we have a motion from the debtors to retain certain personal exempt property under Chapter 7 protection. They are requesting to keep one vehicle for work purposes, their wedding rings and personal clothing and jewelry valued under $5,000. It was a standard request. Even in bankruptcy, you usually get to keep your shirt and a way to get to a job." Julian stood up. His voice was shaky. "Your Honor, please," he begged. "I need my car. It is a 2022 Mercedes. It is the only thing I have left. I need it to get to interviews. And my watch. It was a gift. It is sentimental." Nia stood up too. "And my engagement ring," she whispered. "It is 3 carats. It is all I have of my marriage. Please, we have suffered enough. We are living in a motel." The judge looked sympathetic. "The law is usually kind to the destitute." "Mr. Clark," she asked, "what is the position of the primary creditor?" Mr. Clark looked at his notes. He looked confused for a second. "Well, Your Honor, that has changed." "Changed?" Julian asked, looking up. "What do you mean?" "The bank. Mr. Clark said sold the debt yesterday. They classified it as toxic distress and offloaded it to a private buyer for pennies on the dollar." Julian's eyes lit up. A private buyer? That sounded like a loophole. That sounded like a deal could be made. "Who bought it?" Todd asked, leaning forward. "Who holds the paper?" Mr. Clark turned and looked at the back of the courtroom. He looked directly at me. "The debt was purchased by a private entity managed by Mr. Thaddeus Coleman." The room went silent. Julian spun around in his chair. He saw me. For a second, I saw hope in his eyes. Pure, blinding hope. He thought I had come to save him. He thought I had bought the debt to forgive it, to wipe the slate clean. "Dad," he gasped. "Dad, you bought it." He nudged Nia. "Look, Nia, Dad bought the debt. We are saved." Nia started to cry. "Oh, thank God, thank God." They looked at me with smiles that were pathetic and desperate. They thought the nightmare was over. They thought the bank was the villain and I was the hero riding in at the last minute. I stood up. I walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. I passed the bar. I stood next to the trustee. Mr. Coleman, the judge said, "You are now the primary creditor holding the note for $85 million. What is your position regarding the debtor's motion to retain personal assets?" I looked at Julian. I looked at the Mercedes key fob sitting on the table in front of him. I looked at the Rolex Submariner on his wrist, the one I had bought him when he graduated college, the one he wore while he gambled away my money. I looked at Nia. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger, a ring Todd had bought using a bonus check from the company that I had not authorized. I looked at Todd. He was wearing a designer belt with a gold buckle. They were destitute, but they were still decorated. They were still clinging to the costumes of wealth. "My position is simple. Your Honor," I said, my voice filling the room deep and resonant. "I object to the motion." Julian's smile froze. It didn't fade, it just shattered. What he whispered. "I object to them keeping anything I said," turning to the judge. "Not the car, not the rings, not the watches, not the designer clothes. Dad." Julian screamed, standing up. "You cannot be serious. You bought the debt. You own it. You can just cancel it." I turned to him. "I didn't buy the debt to cancel it, Julian," I said coldly. "I bought it to collect it." "But we have nothing," Todd shouted. "You know we have nothing. You have that belt," I said, pointing. "You have that watch, Julian. You have that ring, Nia." I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, for 40 years I made a mistake, a grave mistake. I raised these children in a bubble. I shielded them from the rain. I gave them cars they didn't earn. I gave them houses they couldn't afford. I gave them jobs they didn't deserve. I gripped the railing of the witness stand. I taught them how to spend money," I said. "But I never taught them how to respect it. I never taught them the weight of a dollar. I never taught them that a man is defined by what he can build, not what he can buy." I looked at my children. "They are 40 years old, Your Honor, and they are spiritual infants. They think money is magic. They think it appears because they deserve it." I shook my head. "I am done being their magician. So I am asking the court for full liquidation, total strip down. I want the Mercedes sold. I want the Rolex sold. I want the diamond ring sold. I want the designer suit sold." "Dad, please," Nia wailed, clutching her hand to her chest. "It is my wedding ring. It is a rock, Nia," I said. "It is a piece of carbon bought with stolen money. It means nothing if the marriage is based on fraud." "But I need the car," Julian begged. "How will I get around?" "You have legs," I said. "I walked to school until I was 12. I walked to my first job at the docks. You can walk, Julian, or you can take the bus. It costs $2.50. Maybe you will meet some real people there." "This is cruel," Todd spat. "You are a vindictive old man. You just want to see us naked." "I want to see you real," I roared. The shout echoed in the courtroom, silencing them. "I want to strip away the costumes," I said, lowering my voice. "I want to take away every single thing that allows you to pretend you are better than anyone else. I want you to stand in this world with nothing but your character." I looked at them with a mixture of love and iron, because that is the only way you will ever learn to survive. As long as you have that Rolex, Julian, you will look at your wrist and think you are a rich man temporarily embarrassed. But if you have a bare wrist, you might finally look at your hands and realize they are made for work. I turned to the judge. "Liquidate it all, Your Honor. Every dime, every thread. If it has value, it goes to the debt." The judge looked at me. She looked at the pain in my face. She understood. This wasn't malice, this was surgery. She nodded slowly. "Motion to retain assets denied," she ruled. "The court grants the primary creditor's request for full liquidation." She banged the gavel. Bam! That sound was louder than a gunshot. She pointed at the marshal standing by the wall. "Officers, please secure the assets listed. The watches, the jewelry, the vehicle keys. Now!" "No!" Julian screamed as the marshal approached him. "No! Get away from me." "Give it to me, son," the marshal said, holding out his hand. "The watch." Julian looked at me. He looked at the watch. He looked at his life. "Take it off, Julian," I said. He trembled. Tears streamed down his face. Slowly, agonizingly, he unclasped the Rolex. He handed it to the marshal. The marshal took Naya's ring. She sobbed as if they were cutting off her finger. Todd threw his car keys on the table with a curse. It was done. They stood there stripped of their armor. They looked small. They looked ordinary. I put my hat on my head. I walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Julian cried. "Dad, what do we do now? We are homeless. We are broke." I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Now you start," I said. "Start what he asked. Start living," I said. I walked out of the courtroom. Behind me, I heard the sound of my children weeping. But for the first time in their lives, they weren't weeping for a toy they couldn't have. They were weeping because they were finally awake, and waking up is painful. I walked out into the city streets. I took a deep breath. I hailed a cab. It was time to go back to work. I had a foundation to run, and I had a legacy to rebuild. One brick at a time. 3 months is a long time when you are hungry. In the world of the wealthy, 3 months is a financial quarter. It is a season of fashion. It is a vacation in the Alps. But in the world where my children now lived, 3 months was an eternity. It was 90 days of waking up on a thin mattress that smelled of mildew. It was 90 days of counting coins to buy instant noodles. It was 90 days of realizing that the world does not care who your father is if you cannot pay for your own bus ticket. Julian and Nia had fallen off the map. After the bankruptcy court stripped them bare, they vanished into the gray cracks of the city. I heard rumors. I heard Julian was washing dishes at a diner on the south side, a place where the grease hangs in the air like fog. I heard Nia was working the night shift as a janitor in an office building, scrubbing the same marble floors she used to walk on in Italian heels. I didn't call them. I didn't check on them. I let gravity do its work. It was a Tuesday evening in November. A cold rain was falling against the glass of my apartment window. I was in the kitchen stirring a pot on the stove. It was a recipe I hadn't made in years. Okra gumbo, Viola's recipe. The smell of the roux browning the scent of thyme and bay leaves filled the small space with memories of a life that felt like a dream. Then came the knock. It wasn't the pounding of entitlement I had heard before. It wasn't the frantic hammering of desperation. It was a soft, hesitant sound. A tap, like a bird hitting the glass. I turned down the heat on the stove. I wiped my hands on a towel. I walked to the door. I checked the monitor. They were standing there. Julian and Nia. They were soaked. They wore cheap plastic ponchos that were torn in places. Julian was shivering, his hands tucked into his armpits. Nia was leaning against the doorframe, her head bowed. They didn't look like Colemans. They looked like ghosts. I opened the door. The smell of wet wool and exhaustion drifted in. They looked up at me. There was no anger in their eyes, no scheme, no demand, just a hollow, profound emptiness. Julian's face was gaunt. His cheekbones were sharp, cutting against skin that looked gray and papery. His hands, the hands that used to shuffle poker chips, were red and chapped, covered in small cuts from steel wool and harsh soap. Nia looked older than me. Her eyes were sunken dark circles, bruising the skin beneath them. She wasn't wearing pearls. She was wearing a uniform from a cleaning service visible under her open poncho. "Hello, Dad," Julian whispered. His voice was cracked like a dry leaf. I looked at them. I stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth, blocking the light. "What do you want?" I asked. I expected a plea for money. I expected a story about how unfair the world was. But Julian just looked at his feet. "We are hungry," he said. It was simple. It was a primal. It was the truth. Nia looked up, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "We haven't eaten since yesterday, Dad," she said softly. "We ran out of money. The rent at the boarding house, it took everything." I looked at them. I looked at the children I had raised to be kings and queens, now standing as beggars on my doormat. And for the first time in months, I didn't see the enemies who tried to destroy me. I saw the humans I had failed to teach. "Come in," I said. They hesitated. They looked at the clean floor, then at their muddy shoes. "Take off your shoes," I commanded. "And the ponchos. Leave them in the hall." They stripped off the wet layers with trembling hands. They stepped inside, walking softly, as if afraid the floor would break beneath them. The smell of the gumbo hit them. I saw Julian's nose twitch. I saw Nia's stomach clench. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the small dining table. They sat. They didn't slouch. They sat with their hands in their laps, waiting. I went to the kitchen. I took 3 bowls. I ladled the thick, dark stew over mounds of white rice. I cut 3 pieces of cornbread slathered in butter. I brought the bowls to the table. I set one in front of Julian, one in front of Nia. Eat, I said. They didn't wait for a toast. They didn't wait for a napkin. They picked up their spoons and they ate with a ferocity that broke my heart. They ate like wolves. They ate like they were afraid the food would vanish if they stopped. I sat down with my own bowl, but I didn't eat. I watched them. I watched Julian scrape the bottom of the bowl. I watched Nia use a piece of cornbread to wipe up the last drop of gravy. When they were done, they sat back, breathing heavily, the color slowly returning to their faces. "It is Mom's recipe," Nia whispered, her eyes closed. "I haven't tasted this in 5 years," I said. "Since the funeral. You said it was peasant food, Nia. You said you wanted sushi." Nia flinched. She opened her eyes and they were full of shame. "I was stupid," she said quietly. "I was so stupid." I looked at Julian. He was staring at his empty bowl, his hands resting on the table. "How are the hands?" I asked. He looked at his scarred knuckles. "They hurt," he said. "The dishwasher water? It is hot. And the chemicals. They burn." I nodded. "It is honest pain," I said. "It is better than the pain of handcuffs." Julian looked up at me. "You were right, Dad," he said. "About everything. The work. The value. I didn't know. I thought money was just paper. I thought it grew on trees. And now I asked." "Now I know it costs blood," Julian said. "I make $12 an hour. I stand for 10 hours. And at the end of the day, I have enough for a sandwich and a bus ride." He looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in his life. "I am sorry, Dad, not because I lost the money, but because I wasted your life. I wasted everything you built." I looked at him. I saw the change. It wasn't complete. It wasn't perfect. But the arrogance was gone, burned away by the friction of reality. I stood up. I took their bowls to the sink. I washed them. The sound of the water running was the only noise in the apartment. I dried my hands and turned around. "So what now?" I asked. Julian looked at Nia. They exchanged a glance of shared defeat. "We go back," he said. "I have a shift tomorrow morning. If I am late, they will fire me. Nia has to clean the lobby on 5th Street. You walked here?" I asked. "Yes," Nia said. "It took 2 hours, but we had to see you. We just wanted—" She stopped. "You wanted a meal," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "And we wanted to say goodbye. We are moving to a shelter next week. The boarding house is kicking us out. We cannot afford the room." I leaned against the counter. I crossed my arms. "I am not giving you money," I said. "I know," Julian said quickly. "We didn't come for money. We know that door is closed." I looked at them. I measured them. "I am not giving you money," I repeated. "But I have something else." They looked up. "I bought the old warehouse back," I said. "The one on the west side. The one where I started." Julian nodded. He remembered it. He used to play hide and seek there when he was 5. "I need a crew," I said. "A night crew. Loading trucks, sorting packages. It is hard work. It is cold in the winter and hot in the summer. The boxes are heavy, 50 pounds minimum." I looked at Julian. "I need a loader. Someone strong. Someone who can take orders." I looked at Nia. "And I need an inventory clerk. Someone who can count. Someone who can stand on concrete floors for 8 hours without complaining. The pay is minimum wage," I said. $15 an hour. No benefits, no company car, no title. You clock in, you work, you clock out. If you steal, you go to jail. If you are late, you are fired." I stared at them. "It is not a handout. It is a job. A bottom-of-the-barrel job." They looked at each other. $15 was a raise for Julian. It was a lifeline for Nia. But it was more than that. It was a chance to be near me. A chance to be near the legacy they had lost. "I will take it," Julian said instantly. He stood up. "I will take it, Dad. I can lift. I can work. I promise." Nia stood up too. "I will take it. I am good at counting. I can organize." I walked over to them. I stood toe to toe with my son. "You are not the CEO," I said. "You are nobody. You are a pair of hands. The other workers, they will know who you are. They will know you are the idiot who lost the empire. They will laugh at you. They will mock you." "I can take it," Julian said, his jaw setting. "Let them laugh. I deserve it. And you..." Nia, I said, turning to her. You are not the princess. You are the help. Can you handle that? Nia nodded, wiping her tears. I am already the help, Dad. I scrub toilets for strangers. Working for you, working for the name, it would be an honor. I looked at them. I searched for a lie. I searched for the old entitlement. I didn't find it. Okay, I said. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out 2 bus passes. Not cash. Bus passes. Be at the West Gate tomorrow at 6 p.m., I said. Ask for Mike. He is the foreman. Don't tell him I sent you. Tell him you are the new hires. If he hires you, you stay. If he thinks you are soft, he kicks you out. I handed them the passes. This gets you there, I said. What happens after that is up to you. Julian took the pass. He held it like it was a winning lottery ticket. Thank you, Dad, he whispered. Thank you. Go, I said, pointing to the door. You have a long walk to the bus stop, and you need to sleep. You have work tomorrow. They walked to the door. They put on their wet ponchos. They put on their muddy shoes. Julian opened the door. He paused. He looked back at me standing in the warm kitchen. The soup was good, Dad, he said. I nodded. It tastes better when you earn it, I said. He smiled. A weak, tired smile. But it was real. Good night, Dad. Good night, Julian. Good night, Nia. They walked out into the rain. I closed the door. I locked it. I went back to the window. I watched them walk down the street, 2 small figures huddled against the storm. They had nothing. They were starting from 0. But as I watched them turn the corner, I felt a lightness in my chest. They were walking. They were moving forward under their own power. I had destroyed their lives to save their souls. And tonight, for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, it had worked. I turned off the kitchen light. See you at work, kids, I whispered into the dark. Don't be late. 1 year is a lifetime in the shipping business. In 12 months, seasons change, contracts are signed and broken, and boys become men if they survive the winter. It had been exactly 365 days since I watched my children walk out of my apartment into the rain with nothing but bus passes and the clothes on their backs. I parked my sedan in the shadow of the old water tower overlooking the West Side Depot. It was 6 in the morning. The sun was just starting to bleed over the horizon, turning the gray concrete of the loading dock into a stage lit by fire. I rolled my window down an inch. I could hear the beep of the forklifts reversing. I could hear the shout of the foreman. I could smell the diesel and the coffee and the sweat of honest labor. I wasn't here as the honorary founder. I wasn't here as Thaddeus Coleman, the tycoon. I was just a ghost haunting the edges of the world I used to own. I raised my binoculars. There they were. Julian was on Bay 4. He looked different. The soft, doughy look of a man who spent his life in air conditioning was gone. He was lean now, wiry. His muscles were ropey under his faded blue work shirt. His head was shaved close to hide the gray, but his face was dark from the sun and ingrained with the kind of grease that doesn't wash off with expensive soap. He wasn't shouting orders. He was taking them. Big Mike the foreman pointed at a pallet of heavy crates. Hydraulic pumps, 300 pounds each. Julian didn't complain. He didn't roll his eyes. He squatted down, keeping his back straight the way I had taught him 40 years ago, and he lifted. He moved with a rhythm. Lift, turn, stack, lift, turn, stack. He was a machine. I watched his hands. The hands that had once held a royal flush and lost $5 million were now covered in calluses. They were scarred. They were ugly. And they were the most beautiful hands I had ever seen. Naya was on the clipboard duty near the dispatch office. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail and she wore no makeup. The lines around her eyes were deeper etched by worry and long nights. But she stood tall. She was arguing with a truck driver, a big man who was trying to cut the line. No ticket, no load, Nia said, her voice carrying over the noise of the engines. Back of the line, Miller. I don't care if you are in a rush. The rules are the rules. The driver grumbled, but he moved his truck. Nia didn't gloat. She just marked her clipboard and moved to the next driver. She commanded respect, not because of her last name, but because she did her job. I watched them for an hour. I saw them sweat. I saw them struggle. Then the whistle blew for the lunch break. The crew moved to the break area, a patch of concrete with a few wooden benches under a corrugated tin roof. Julian and Nia sat together. They didn't have a fancy bento box or a catered meal. They had brown paper bags. I zoomed in with the binoculars. Julian pulled out a sandwich. It looked like bologna on white bread. Cheap. Filling. Nia had an apple and a thermos of soup. They ate in silence, shoulders touching. They were a team now. The rivalry was gone. The jealousy was gone. They were just two soldiers in the trenches sharing the same war. Then I saw something that made me lower the binoculars. A young kid, maybe 19, sat down a few feet away. He was new. I recognized the nervous look in his eyes. He didn't have a bag, he didn't have food, he just sat there staring at his boots, trying to look like he wasn't hungry. Julian stopped eating. He looked at the kid. A year ago, Julian would have laughed. A year ago, Julian would have made a joke about the kid being poor. A year ago, Julian would have eaten a steak in front of a starving man and not felt a thing. But this was not that Julian. My son tore his sandwich in half. It wasn't a big sandwich. Half meant he would be hungry later. Half meant his stomach would growl during the afternoon shift. He didn't hesitate. He leaned over and tapped the kid on the knee. He held out the half sandwich. "Here," Julian said. "Take it." The kid looked up surprised. "I cannot take your lunch, man." "Take it," Julian insisted, shoving it into the kid's hand. "You cannot lift crates on an empty tank. Eat up." The kid took it. He nodded a silent thank you. Julian smiled. It wasn't the shark smile of the boardroom. It was a small, tired, genuine smile. Nia watched him. She didn't scold him for giving away their food. She reached into her bag, took out her apple, cut it in half with a pocket knife, and gave a piece to Julian. I sat in my car, and I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was hot and salty. I had waited 72 years to see that. I had waited a lifetime to see my son give something away without expecting a receipt. I put the binoculars down. I started the car. I didn't drive home. I drove to the office of Marcus Sterling. Marcus was waiting for me. He had the coffee ready. He saw the look on my face. "You saw them?" he asked. "I saw them," I said, sitting down in the leather chair. And Marcus asked, "And they are ready," I said. Marcus opened his drawer. He pulled out a file. "So we reinstate the inheritance," he asked, reaching for a pen. "We give them the money back." "No," I said sharply. Marcus stopped. He looked confused. "But Thad, you said they are ready. You said they changed. If they changed, why not give them the reward?" "Because money is not a reward, Marcus," I said, leaning forward. "Money is a tool. And if you give a power tool to a toddler, they will cut their hand off. They are not toddlers anymore, but they are still recovering addicts. You don't give a recovering alcoholic the keys to a distillery just because he has been sober for a year." I tapped the desk. "We are going to write a new will. A new trust." "Okay," Marcus said, opening a fresh legal pad. "What are the terms?" "It is called a spendthrift trust," I said. Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. A trust designed for beneficiaries who cannot control their spending. A trust that protects the money from the recipient's own bad decisions. "Go on," Marcus said. 10 years, I said. 10 years, Marcus repeated, writing it down. "They have to work," I said. "Continuous employment. No gaps longer than a month unless for medical reasons. They have to stay clean. No gambling, no drugs, no debt. And if they do that," Marcus asked. Then I said they get a stipend. Not a lump sum, a monthly payout equal to exactly what they earn from their job. If Julian earns $2,000 a month, the trust matches it. If he earns $5,000, the trust matches it. Incentive matching. Marcus said, smiling, "I like it. It encourages work." "Exactly," I said. "They will never be billionaires, Marcus. They will never fly private jets again. They will never own islands. But they will be comfortable. They will be safe. And most importantly, they will be productive." "And the principal?" Marcus asked. "The bulk of your estate. The millions you recovered from the sale." "It stays in the foundation," I said. "The Beatrice Carter Foundation. It goes to help people who actually need it. The elderly, the abused, the victims of financial fraud." "My children don't need millions," I said. "They need purpose." Marcus finished writing. He looked up at me. "You know, Thad," he said softly, "most fathers would have caved. Most fathers would have seen them sweeping floors and written a check." I looked out the window at the city skyline. "Most fathers want their children to be happy," I said. "I wanted my children to be good. There is a difference, Marcus. Happiness is cheap. Goodness costs everything. I signed the document. Thaddeus W. Coleman. The ink was black and permanent. This was the final contract, the final deal. There were no loopholes this time, no hidden clauses, just a simple promise. If you walk the line will hold you up. I stood up. I shook Marcus's hand. Thank you, old friend, I said. Where are you going now? Marcus asked. I am going to get some lunch, I said. I am craving a bologna sandwich. I walked out of the office. The sun was high now. The city was bustling with noise and ambition. I thought about Julian sharing his lunch. I thought about Nia counting boxes. They were tired. They were poor. They were working harder than they ever had in their lives. But they were alive. Really alive. I had destroyed their arrogance. I had burned down their entitlement. I had crushed their false idols. And in the ashes, I had found my son and daughter. I walked to my car. I got in. I looked at the photo of Viola I kept on the dashboard. We did it, Vi, I whispered. It took a sledgehammer, but we fixed them. I started the engine. I wasn't a billionaire tycoon anymore. I was just a father who had done the hardest thing a father can do. I had stopped saving them so they could save themselves. And as I drove away, merging into the traffic of the city I built, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. Because I knew that tonight, when they went to sleep on their thin mattresses with their aching backs, they would sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of the just. And that was a gift money could never buy. The rain has stopped. The city of Atlanta is washing itself clean under the glow of the streetlights, and I am sitting in my favorite leather chair with the lights off. The only illumination comes from the city below, and the small candle flickering next to the silver-framed photograph on the side table. It is quiet here. For the first time in 40 years, the noise in my head has silenced. The roar of the engines, the shouting of the shareholders, the whining of my children. It is all gone. I pick up the glass of bourbon. It is the cheap stuff, the kind I used to drink when I was driving a rig across the Midwest. It burns. It tastes like gasoline and oak. It tastes like the truth. I look at the photo. Viola is smiling at me, frozen in a moment of pure joy from a time before the money rotted us from the inside out. Thay Kung Viola, I whisper into the darkness using the few words of Vietnamese I learned from an old war buddy just to make her laugh. You see, Viola, sometimes love has to be cruel. Sometimes you have to break the bone to reset it straight. I lean back and close my eyes. I think about the empire I built. Coleman Logistics, 500 trucks, warehouses that span zip codes. I spent my life thinking that was my legacy. I thought the steel and the concrete and the profit margins were what I was leaving behind. I measured my success in quarterly earnings and market share. I thought that if I piled up enough gold, my children would be able to stand on top of it and touch the stars. But I was wrong. I was so tragically wrong. I didn't build a platform for them. I dug a hole. I filled it with money, and I threw them inside. I shielded them from the very struggle that made me who I am. I took away their hunger. I took away their need to strive. And in doing so, I crippled them. I turned them into invalids of the soul, unable to walk without a crutch made of cash. Julian, my firstborn. I remember holding him in the hospital the day he was born. I looked at his tiny hands and I swore he would never have to work as hard as I did. I swore he would never have blisters. I swore he would never know the panic of an empty fridge. I kept that promise. And look what it cost him. It cost him his dignity. It cost him his manhood. It turned him into a leech who thought the world owed him a living just because he carried my last name. And Nia, my princess. I bought her every doll, every dress, every dream. I taught her that her value came from what she owned, not who she was. I taught her to marry for status. I taught her to look down on the people who cleaned her floors. I created monsters, Viola. I created them with my checkbook and my guilt. But tonight I feel a strange sense of peace, because I finally stopped the assembly line. I finally recalled the defective products. I think about Julian sleeping on his mattress in that boarding house. His back probably hurts. His hands are definitely raw. He is tired in a way he has never been tired before. But he is sleeping the sleep of an honest man. He earned that sleep. He traded his sweat for it. I think about Nia counting boxes in the cold warehouse. She isn't wearing pearls. She isn't planning a gala. She is worried about inventory counts. She is worried about doing a good job. She is finding out that there is pride in accuracy. There is pride in being useful. I destroyed their lives. I know that. I blew up their marriages. I repossessed their cars. I humiliated them in front of the entire city. I became the villain in their story, and I would do it again, 1,000 times over. Because the $85 million debt wasn't a punishment, it was a mirror. When I signed that paper in the courtroom, when I activated the Scorpion plan, I wasn't taking something away from them. I was giving them the only thing I had left to give. I gave them reality. I gave them the weight of the world, and I said, carry it. Most parents cannot do it. We are wired to protect. We are wired to save. When we see our children falling, our instinct is to catch them, to cushion the blow, to write the check, to make the call. But sometimes catching them is the worst thing you can do. If you catch them every time, they never learn that the ground is hard. They never learn to look where they are walking. They never learn to balance. I had to let them hit the concrete. I had to let them shatter. Because only when you are broken into pieces can you put yourself back together in a different shape. A stronger shape. I look at the city lights again. Somewhere out there, my children are waking up for the night shift. They are putting on their boots. They are drinking cheap coffee. They are dreading the cold, but they are doing it. They are not calling me. They are not calling a lawyer. They are not calling a loan shark. They are going to work, and that viola is the greatest return on investment I have ever seen. I sip my bourbon. The liquid is warm in my chest. I have a secret even Marcus doesn't know fully, the spendthrift trust, the safety net I built for 10 years from now. It is sitting there waiting. If they make it, if they survive the decade, if they prove that they have become the people I know they can be, then they will have comfort. Not excessive wealth, not private jets, but comfort. But they will have earned it. It won't be a gift, it will be a harvest. And if they don't make it, if they quit, if they go back to the gambling and the greed, then the money stays in the foundation. It goes to the widows, it goes to the orphans, it goes to the people who need a hand up, not a handout. I am gambling on them one last time, but this time the odds are fair. I put the glass down, I blow out the candle. The smoke drifts up into the darkness, a thin gray ribbon of prayer. I am alone in this apartment. It is small, it is simple, but it is mine. I am Thaddeus Coleman. I started with nothing. I built everything. I lost it all. And then I built the only thing that really matters. I built a family. It took me 71 years and a catastrophe to do it. But I did it. I stand up. My knees pop. I walk to the window and place my hand against the cool glass. Good night, Julian. Good night, Nia. Work hard. Keep your head down. Keep your hands busy. And remember, the name on your shirt isn't just a brand. It is a promise. Don't break it. I turn away from the window. I walk to the bedroom. The script is finished. The play is over. The actors are finally playing their proper roles. And the director can finally rest. Some inheritances are blessings, others are curses disguised in gold. I spent a lifetime building an empire hoping to give my children the world, but I only succeeded in crippling their souls with entitlement. Giving them exactly what they demanded was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was the only way to save them from themselves. True wealth isn't what you are given. It is what you build, what you keep, and who you become in the process. Sometimes you have to let your children hit rock bottom so they can finally learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. This is the story of how I lost my fortune to save my family. It is a story about the difference between price and value. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to save someone you love, if you have ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted, or if you just believe that hard work is the only true currency in this life, then hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, would you have done what I did? Would you have pressed the button? Or would you have let them keep the crown? I read every comment, because now I have plenty of time. I am Thad Coleman, and I am signing off. Good night.